This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motive.
And night fell in a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy's created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam. And I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people's heads have so much to believe in and have such an imperial motive for putting a position on them. They'll never let the truth facts, some of them born to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Jack. Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 97. I'm your co-host Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we have a guest on the pod to talk about a really interesting subject that I think we've been meaning to get into for a while. But we got the venerable Wub on the line. Wub, are you there?
Wub,
I'm here.
Of course.
I'm here.
How's it going? So we've been following each other on Twitter for a while, and you have a blog, right? That I've sampled and found really interesting and liked a lot of your threads. And
Right, yeah.
We'd been talking a little bit for a while about doing an episode. Then you came with a subject that I thought was kind of perfect. So I guess today we're going to talk all things punk rock, and I guess I don't even know. We'll talk a little bit about, I think, the history of punk rock, but I know, Wub, you wanted to talk about kind of I think a lot of like the broader like social dynamics of it. And
yeah,
I don't know, I guess, not to bury the lead, like, is it fash? Because it's something I've wondered a lot over the last few years as, I'm sure we'll also get into our own relationships with like punk rock, but it's something that like as
we've definitely like called it fash on the podcast before.
We definitely have.
It's like fashliness. Yeah.
Which isn't to throw it all out, but I feel like for a while it's like it's something I felt compelled to like make a stand on maybe the last few years. Just posting shit on Twitter is like pushing back against like the punk mentality in like especially in kind of like the American left.
It's true.
And
it's interesting to think of like the punk mentality as something that like really suffuses like the American like left culture. I feel like the idea that like it's somehow like virtuous to be like a mess and like strung out and like limping along and just like being self-destructive, like a dirtbag, if you will.
Basically.
A
scumbag, a piece of shit, of course, crust punks and stuff. But I guess to start, like, Wub, I know you definitely are interested in this topic. Like, what is your relationship with punk rock? Were you a punk at any point?
It's interesting because my like town, it has a local scene, and it was, music wise, the different sort of people who had like local projects, they couldn't necessarily just separate themselves from each other because nobody would like show up at shows. So you'd have shows where there would be like punk bands and then like some like really bad like metal bands, maybe like an indie artist would open the show, so there was a lot of stuff like that. And then kind of after a couple of years, there was a lot more like punk and hardcore stuff. And when I first started going to shows, though, I was like 14. I mean, I'd wear like black, like I had a Black Flag shirt I'd wear like all the time.
Yeah.
And and I definitely like I considered myself a punk and like had, I mean, whether they wore like mohawks or whatever, like spiked leather and stuff like that, A really good friend of mine back then was really into like making her own clothes and stuff, just I had another really good friend, and we both actually defined ourselves as nihilists in high school. Like as like
Interesting.
we weren't just like, yeah, we're nihilists. We would like try to explain it to people and stuff.
Yeah, awesome.
We would basically try to like convert people to nihilism because that's how much we like believed in.
I mean, that was a
Yeah.
vibe.
I mean,
what
I was
actually?
I was a big goth teen, so
yeah,
yeah,
that's
I
true.
understand.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Wub, like
You're from
what?
you're from the same family tree.
Yeah, it's same basic family, like post-punk, I guess, is like the real
post-punk.
goth.
Yeah. Wub, what era were you kind of in high school? I guess without being
I was
specific
in
if you
high
want to.
school. I was in high school when Obama was president. So like
Wow.
20.
Oh, okay.
That's amazing.
2010 to 2014, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we're really the old timers here.
Yeah,
we're the old
heads,
basically.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay.
Because I was in high school during the Bush administration, and that was a.
I have a friend. Who was like that was like a Bush punk basically, and he would always tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean that was an era where
30s, I guess.
Like punk had already been totally like fully absorbed and commercialized by the 2000s. Like it was a total mainstream
was like the
genre
era of like Green Day and stuff.
Green Day, American Idiot, and growing up,
like the
and growing up in the Bay Area, there was a lot of punk rock.
41 was big for me back then.
Oh, I had a friend who loved Sum 41. I always thought that was so lame. Like, never waste my time becoming a casualty. Yeah, I thought that was so fucking.
My mom should have had an abortion. Yeah.
Oh wow.
That.
That's a perfect example of like punk's like commercialization. Like
pop,
is Sum 41. Like what? How old were they? They were like 11. Like
no. I mean they were a little older, and
they were pretty young though.
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of these bands were, because punk is like such a teen like genre, and that was like early 2000s. That was, I remember like freshman year, like right around like 9/11 was when Sum 41 was really huge,
because their ages added up to 41. That was like what Sum 41 was.
Sick.
Yeah,
but I mean, but there was, I remember the overriding kind of vibe, and maybe this is partly due because like I grew up in the Bay Area, where you had like a certain strong punk scene, like Gilman Street in Berkeley. I know I went there a few times in high school, and like given the overall political orientation at the time, and that a lot of young people were kind of anti-Bush, like anti-Republican and stuff, that was always kind of what I just like associated punk with, more or less. I mean, I sort of knew like maybe some I had some friends who were hardcore kids, and maybe even knew the odd like straight edge person here and then. But I don't know, like my personal experience was always that the kids who were almost more like spooky right wing were like death metal heads, even though a lot of them like on a personal level were like very sweet and friendly people. But like that music definitely embodied a kind of just like girl, like literally.
I cannot remember his name, but there was a guy I found out about who was like a huge death metal nerd that joined Al Qaeda, and he was also some like business guy's son or something. I cannot remember his name. But
that makes sense. There's a death
Google
metal
like Al Qaeda death metal. There's some guy that was like, it was a news story during the Bush
Adam
years.
Gadon.
I think that's him.
There's a few of those kids, like the kid who joined ISIS, who's the son of like an Air Force colonel who grew up in like suburban
John
Texas.
Walker
That's punk.
too. He was the most
joining ISIS to rebel against your Air Force colonel father. Very punk.
I mean, honestly, like ISIS is kind of punk rock. Maybe we'll come back to that. But like honestly, their style is like they could be called Black Flag, basically. Like, you know what I mean?
No, they're a straight edge.
I feel like there's
they are straight edge.
I mean,
except for Captagon.
Michael Muhammad Knight is maybe like the most like distilled example of that crossover, who was like very into punk and very into Islam as well, and became Muslim. Like, I feel like kind of like as I mean, I think maybe he would acknowledge like sort of as like a oppositional defiant type thing. I mean,
Yeah.
which he then later explored pretty extensively. You know, I think.
Well, and that's got an echo
but,
in like American white kids too.
Yeah, there's definitely
like
a sort of
alt-right or whatever, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, there's definitely a crossover between the sort of opposition to defiant like punk thing and Islam, you know, for sure. Like our conversion to Islam or exploring Islam. I think maybe hip hop, people who go in the direction of hip hop, maybe like which is when I used to like
it's hip hop straight
edge. When I used to tutor kids in suburbs and I would mention like that I like listened to hip hop to like the kids, they'd be like, my dad like, you know, would never let me listen to hip hop. You know, he like gets angry watching the NBA, you know, like so I can see why people would like that could also be like a, you know, a rebellious thing. But then of course that did become, I think, you know, a little bit after, like, I feel like when I was in high school, like Eminem kind of like broke the veil a little bit of like hip hop in the suburbs. And there was a whole
I liked like Eminem a lot too when I was really young. Like
he came out when I was in middle school, and it was
like 10, 11 years old.
Right.
And
I feel like that kind of that's kind of an expression of who, you know, he himself like kind of like one could say like a liminally like Islamic figure in certain ways, but like
also a liminally kind of punk figure as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, like there's a little crossover. That's
kind of an interesting thing about like the 90s was it's when you started seeing a lot of those kind of subcultures start sort of fusing back together after being like very separate things for a while, I think.
Yeah.
And now you're really seeing that with like SoundCloud rap and hyperpop and stuff. There's been a huge
yeah, you can definitely see, even though punk, like pure punk, has been almost resigned to like this sort of boomer category of music. Like it's still out there, but I don't know, like if like there probably are still kids, just like there are kids that still get into like Nirvana that are into it, but it's not an actively dominant genre. But it is hugely influential on like SoundCloud rap and a lot of things that are huge with like the kids these days. So.
Well, I went to a hardcore show for which no hardcore band is like big really unless they're like Hatebreed or something. But for a band that had gotten pretty big for what, you know, for that type of music. And a local punk group opened for him, and there was a kid, this was like 3 years ago, and there was a kid with a giant mohawk that almost broke his neck stage diving off the rafter. So those kids are still out there. They're just a little bit maybe fewer and further between. The true punks,
the true believers. As far as I know, Gilman Street is like still there. It's a pretty small venue, but I don't know. Maybe COVID killed it. But yeah, I haven't been. I think I went to a hardcore show in Staten Island in like 2009. That's the last time I've ever seen like hardcore, like a hardcore scene up close. Yeah. But it is interesting to like reflect back on the 90s, because going back and watching a lot of these like old documentaries and stuff and like old talk shows and like media from the 80s and the 90s, like I still do, it brought back in my memory kind of the feeling of like what it meant to be a punk like in the 90s. And I was like a little kid, so I wasn't actively into it, but it's like, you know, like I had an older sister, and there were like my friends had older like brothers, and so it was always kind of around, you know, and it felt, and even just watching, like I'm sure we'll talk later about like the Donahue episode that we watched about where he interviews hardcore punks, like it really you really get a vibe of like how much it meant to people to have this identity and be a part of the scene and adopt these kind of attitudes and stuff. And it did feel kind of like it's weird watching these like Gen Xers just talk about like nobody cares like what, you know, what happens to kids, man. Nobody cares about kids. Like we're just like a lost generation, man. Like grown-ups that just don't get. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like everybody's a kid and then everybody grows up. Like what is this? But of course you could tie that all the way back to the 60s, right? And kind of like to the new left, to the counterculture, like don't trust anybody over 30, man. And kind of stuff like that.
It's kind of interesting because like the Stooges a lot of the time get pointed at as the first punk band, which that's debatable, obviously. But
sure.
Iggy Pop
pretty early on.
Said that his big influence that made him want to start a band was going to see the Doors and being like in the crowd and thinking Jim Morrison was like such a badass, and then being like, well, I want to outdo that guy.
Yeah, he
you
did.
know,
He
like
was
being like, I want to be
yeah.
even more like outrageous and like even more like, and have the music be even more like overwhelming, like, you know,
and aggro and stuff. And so
yeah,
you see that with like his style in the Stooges, like early on, like Raw Power, like with his like glam, like shirtless kind of look. And
absolutely.
I mean, Mick Jagger also is somebody who kind of, I guess, had that a relative influence of like wilding out on stage.
And David Bowie as well had a big influence on like early punk fashion.
Totally.
Which I want to get into with the Sex Pistols because and the Clash as well, because they're both interesting as far as that goes. I remember when I was first kind of getting into punk, there was a whole debate about whether you could consider them boy band.
I think given what's come out in recent years,
or whatever.
Yeah, like you sent that article about Steve Jones's memoir, which I didn't get to really like dig into, but I saw some excerpts and kind of looks like a boy band. Yeah, like
and well, you got to think about too. Recently, Johnny Rotten got so much shit for supporting Trump, or pretending at least to support.
Oh, that's
Trump.
so funny.
He's
That was the
legitimately a Trump supporter.
That was the first like concert. I was not like a fan of the Sex Pistols, like either their old work, but a friend of mine who was also into like punk music, as was I, like in high school, invited me to go see like a Sex Pistols concert at like this arena, like on Long Island. And yeah, I mean, it was just Johnny Rotten, obviously, Sid Vicious having been dead for many years, but it was just like very lame and awful. I think the Reverend like opened for them. It was, but
it's that's happened a lot over the last few years, is like the inevitable, like your punk icon from childhood has come out and said something super reactionary, and it's like,
as we know,
well, that's such a fascinating thing today. It's like talking
it's also
about
the old punk rock, but whatever.
Exactly. Like if you go back to the very beginning, the right wing like reactionary character, even putting aside like Nazi skinheads, but just like the right wing orientation of punk rock really is not like a later phenomenon that like ruined punk. It's really there from like the very beginning, right?
Yeah, and I think where a lot of people get it messed up is like, so I like to use the song Nazi Punks Fuck Off as an example.
Oh yeah, good song.
Like people, great song, but people have this kind of interpretation of it now, like it was like Yellow Biafra was like preempting Nazis from coming to shows. And it's like, if you read about why he wrote that song, it's a lot more the reverse. It's like Nazis coming to shows, or at least people who were, you know, I mean, this is where it gets into the whole irony thing, but it's like people who were at least dressing up like Nazis coming to shows, you know, had caused a lot of people who legitimately were like very racist and like nationalists to start coming to shows, you know.
Absolutely.
And it was written as a response to that, not like a preemption, you know.
Totally.
And there's a documentary, of all places, Boston in the 90s. There's a documentary about their hardcore scene where some guys talk about how they had to like kick the Nazis out of the hardcore scene there. You know, like beat the shit out of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, it's true.
Sometimes you just gotta kill a commie for mommy.
Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about
that.
Right.
Oh yeah,
fucking Ramones.
Have a song called "Kill a Commie."
Yeah. That was I forget which Ramone did that song solo, but it's like kill a commie for mommy, and then later it's like drop a bomb on Muhammad. Yeah, like it's like, fucking annoying.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I didn't remember that part.
Like the Ramones. I mean, speaking of Long Island, a huge hub of punk rock. Huge kind of anti-communist reactionaries. Like the entire their entire lives.
I don't know if it's relevant at all because he didn't seem like any kind of like high-ranking guy or anything, but one of the Ramones had a dad in the military. I can't remember. I don't really think there's a kind of like any deep political connection there, but
like a McGowan connection. Yeah. It's more
not like to that. It wasn't like Frank Zappa's dad being an MK-Ultra like operative.
Exactly. Yeah. But it is funny talking about like, oh, Nazis coming to shows, because like I'm looking right now at the screenshot of like one of the Sex Pistols' most famous interviews from the Grundy show in 1976, which as kind of like gone down in punk lore as like the moment that broke British television and made the punks like so popular. And it's just like one of the dudes, I don't know if it's like I don't think it's a band member, but it's like one of their like little minions like behind them during this interview is just wearing a swastika armband. And it's like not even mentioned. It's not even like brought up in like the interview. It's like very bizarre. And you see that again and again. So it's like, I wonder why like Nazis keep showing up to your shows. Maybe it's because like everybody's wearing swastikas ironically, and at a certain point, at what point does that stop being super ironic?
Yeah, I think what I said on Twitter the other day, that you can maybe say that punk from the very beginning was not necessarily some kind of psyop. I don't necessarily believe that myself, that it was, like, I don't think it was necessarily a psyop, like, from the beginning. But I think that there's always people watching developments in culture, especially if they're developing out of a counterculture that largely was a psyop, you know, like in reaction to that. Mm-hmm. And they're always looking to see how they can instrumentalize that, you know what I mean? And another kind of thing that's interesting about that is that maybe even some of the Nazi punks themselves weren't aware of any kind of deeper connections, you know.
I do get that impression from a lot of the time. Yeah,
like a lot of the time, people even in like right-wing groups won't realize that it's like, you know, informants or infiltrators or anybody like running the group. You know, they just kind of take for granted that, you know, this person who has all this money, you know, to spend on radical, you know, terrorist sometimes activities is just loves the country or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
But, anyway,
I did
not
get
to go too deep down that rabbit hole.
No, for sure. I mean, but I did notice that I watched an interesting documentary. It's actually part of a series that I discovered it late last night. You can watch it on YouTube. It's called The Decline of Western Civilization. Have you guys ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah. I love The Decline. I mean, as far as a film, I love The Decline of Western Civilization.
It's a really good
one of the things that I was telling. It was what made me actually, like, I was already into punk before I watched that, but specifically Fear's performance at the end of the documentary, that was like, I was like, see, I want to do that. I was like, I want to like be in a band that is so outrageous that people start trying to fight me before the show.
They were having a lot of fun.
You know
There's too many of us. There's too many of us. There's too many of us. Let's have a war.
I love that record. And it sucks because Lee Ving is a huge conservative.
I definitely got that vibe from him. The lead singer. Yeah, definitely. But it's a really great. It's from 1981, so it's like just as the kind of new wave, like, or second wave of punk and like hardcore were taking off, and it's just all about like the it profiles several bands in Los Angeles, kind of in like 1979, 1980, including early Black Flag. I think it was pre Henry Rollins,
right?
But which is interesting because like the singer is like I forget who the original singer was, but he's not white, you know, and a few of the members, like, I forget.
I remember correctly, the original singer of Black Flag was actually Keith Morris, who later started the Circle Jerks. And then Ron Reyes was the second vocalist.
Oh, Ron Reyes is okay, so he's the one in the movie.
Yeah. Ron Reyes and Des Cadena, I believe, were both people of color. And it's funny because Black Flag kind of started getting big under them. And Rollins ended up in the band because he was a fan, and they put out in some zine or something. I might be messing this story up, but apparently they put out some kind of thing that were like, yeah, we need another vocalist, even though we've already been through like 5. And Rollins was like, well, maybe I could be vocalist. And then he just kind of on a whim auditioned for him, and then like left his job in DC where he was working with Ian MacKaye at like an ice cream parlor, and then like drove to LA and just joined Black Flag and became like one of the biggest like punk celebrities ever. Yeah. Which according to him, he's not a celebrity.
That's what he would say. I mean, he's on the radio all the time here in LA. He's like very much like a local, like beloved local legend and everything. Yeah. And is kind of like gone normie a little bit.
When Trump won. He wrote an op-ed when Trump won. That was really funny because it was like kept calling him Comrade Trump.
Oh my God. Awesome. Yeah. Exactly.
It was like he was totally on that Russiagate tip. he was like, "Yeah, man, these freaking authoritarians."
Oh,
That's
funny.
the thing with
I didn't realize
punks.
Whether they're
that. I
Trump,
thought he was
whether they're
saying
Putin.
that. I thought he was on the other kind of like, People's Republican.
No. He has a show on
I-
KCRW. There's no way
all right.
that he
Yeah,
would be
right.
like pro-Trump.
Yeah.
No, that's actually like the two. It's like
Well,
the two
and see-
destinies. And like if you're like a Gen X LA punk, you
Yeah,
either
you either
become like a
become-
MAGA reactionary or like you move to Highland Park and become like an in this house like liberal.
Yeah, definitely.
Like
Yeah.
there's only really two
Kamala,
options.
like K-Hive supporters and all, basically. Which that's the thing too. If you look at how K-Hive supporters behave, like online, it's pretty punk rock. It's like kicking
in
out
terms
all
of like
posers,
digitally curb stomping people.
Yeah, just like
No, they're
making
incredibly
sure that
vicious.
the purity of the brand remains.
Right. But I did notice, like in the decline of Western civilization, even back in '81, that they're like in the crowd at many shows, and sometimes like Darby Crash, the Germs lead singer,
Crash.
who is wearing like an Iron Cross necklace the whole time and has a sort of like this like Nazi this Nazi skull. Like it's a skull with a Nazi helmet with like a swastika on it, like in on his kitchen counter. You see in one scene, and all these other people like in the crowd. It shows a guy with a leg cast that just has like a Nazi like swastika drawn on it. And at one point they interview a bunch of different people, and there's a guy who is Asian, and I'm assuming by his affect gay, who's just wearing a gigantic swastika shirt and just talking about like how like I think he says some comment about like, like I don't hate Jews, like whatever, like I wouldn't beat up Jews, I'd beat up everybody. It was one of those kind of things like, I'm not a racist, I just hate all humanity equally.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, like what?
Yeah,
but it gets a vibe like, did they really understand like the significance of like this?
Well, and you gotta
the
think
repping?
too. Well, and it's like you got to think how much of that for a lot of those people was literally like they came out of that era where like the hippies had kind of broken a little bit with that earlier generation, but they were like really not just wanting to like get away from them, but like piss off the older generation as much as possible.
Trigger them.
Like the fastest way, 30, a little bit less than 30 years after World War II to piss off a lot of Americans would be, to rep a swastika, as kind of ironic as that sounds, because, such a big part of American post-war lore was when we beat the Nazis, we stopped the big evil in the world that, was, not inspired by us at all, by the way, but
that's like, that. I mean, that's really like the historical. I understand.
A big part of American post-war lore. Yeah.
It's like if they
isolating.
If they knew how many paperclip scientists have been brought over, like maybe they wouldn't think it's as rebellious as they think it is. But
absolutely,
it's similar to like the 09A, like Hail Hitler ritual, where they call Adolf Hitler like sent by our gods and stuff, because like the greatest sacrilege to like the Magian civilization of the contemporary West is to embrace Hitler. So it's like a similar thing where it's like incredibly provocative. I remember Susie Sue had some kind of Nazi thing too, on like she was kind of a goth punk crossover figure. I feel like she was also like kind of punk, but she also had a Nazi controversy where she like wore a bunch of swastikas.
A number of people did. I think, was it one of the girls
and it's like in the Lester Bangs article.
Yes.
The hermeneutics of Susie Sue's swastika flashing style. This is just something that came up online when I searched
the hermeneutics. Okay. Yeah. Well, you just mentioned the Lester Bangs article.
Well, it's like in that Lester Bangs article when he talks about the girl from the Cramps. Yeah, the girl from the Cramps doing that photo shoot, which I couldn't find a picture of this anywhere. She was doing a photo shoot with a supremacist from Florida, like a church they all like worked out of, and I'm pulling up the article right now. But like and she had like a gun and shit. And there was, I don't remember if it said a big swastika or what. There was like all this like symbol, like obvious white supremacist symbolism all over it. And it's like,
I see it right here. It's it says that in 1977. I opened up a copy of a Florida punk fanzine called New Order and read an article by Miriam Linna of the Cramps, Nervous Rex, and now Xantes. Quote, I love the Ramones because this is the celebration of everything American. Everything everything American, everything teenage and wonderful and white and urban. You could say, and this is him talking. You could say the white jumping out of the sentence was just like Ornette Coleman declaring this is our music, except that the same issue featured a full-page shot of Miriam and one of her little friends posing proudly with their leathers and shades and a pistol in front of the headquarters of the United White People's Party under a sign bearing 3 flags: God, cross, country, stars and stripes, race, swastika. Sorry, Miriam, I can just go so far with affectations of knee-jerk cretinism before I puke. Yeah, I mean, God. But this article is actually really great. Like Lester Bangs, I'd never really read his stuff before. I guess he's a big deal in kind of the punk world, right? So I actually was just gonna bring talk more about this Lester Bangs article, which I think might be a good jumping off point for a lot of the other things we want to dive into. So Lester Bangs, I hadn't read a lot of his stuff. Apparently he's like kind of a big deal in the music and like rock and sort of punk world, right? As a critic. Yeah, and I think some people said that he maybe coined the term punk rock, though I think that's disputed. But he was an early chronicler of like Iggy and the Stooges, like Black Sabbath, a lot of these bands that. Yeah,
and a lot of Robert Christgau, who's kind of like a meme on the 4chan music board these days for having just these ridiculously like idiosyncratic reviews that don't even make sense.
I remember reading his reviews.
Kind of the proto Pitchfork.
He was definitely and his system of like ranking is like very idiosyncratic too. Yes, and definitely.
Yeah. So I think I just want to read like a little bit from the beginning of this article to sort of lay out what he's getting at on particularly the New York punk scene. I think this is in 1979. This is published in the Village Voice, called The White Noise Supremacists. So I wasn't aware that people were kind of talking this much about the weird right-wing vibes in punk and maybe the racist vibes like this early, but here we are. So I'll just read a little bit from the beginning. The other day, I was talking on the phone with a friend who hangs out on the CBGB scene a lot. She was regaling me with examples of the delights available to females in the New York subway system. Quote, so the train came to a sudden halt and I fell on my ass in the middle of a car, and not only did nobody offer to help me out, but all these boons just sat there laughing at me. Boons, I said. What's boons? You know, she said, black guys. Why do you call them that? I don't know. From baboons, I guess. I didn't say anything. Look, I know it's not cool, she finally said, but neither is being a woman in this city. Every fucking place you go, you get these cats hassling you, and sometimes they try to pimp you. And a lot of the times when they hassle you, they're black, and when they try to pimp me, they're always black. Eventually, you can't help it. You just end up reacting. Sometimes I think nothing is simple but the feeling of pain. When I was first asked to write this article, I said sure, because the racism, not to mention the sexism, which is even more pervasive in a whole other piece, on the American New Wave scene had been something I've been bothered by for a long time. When I told the guys in my own band that I was doing this, they just laughed. Well, I guess the money's good, said one. What makes you think the racism in punk has anything special about it that separates it from the rest of society, asked another. Because the rest of society doesn't go around acting like racism is real hip and cool, I answered heatedly. Oh yeah, he sneered. Just walk into a factory sometime, or jail. All right. Power is what we're talking about, or the feeling that you don't have any, or how much ostensible power you can rip out of some other poor sucker's hide. It works the same everywhere, of course, but one of the things that makes the punk stance unique is how it seems to assume substance, or at least style, by the abdication of power. Look at me. I'm a cretinous little wretch and proud of it. It's so true. So many of the people around the CBGBs and Max's scene have always seemed emotionally, if not outright physically crippled. You see speech impediments, hunchbacks, limps, but most of all an overwhelming spiritual flatness. You take parental indifference, a crappy educational system, lots of drugs, media overload, a society with no values left except the hysterical emphasis on physical perfection, and you end up with these little nubbins, the only rebellion around, as Life magazine once labeled the Beats. Richard Hell gave us the catchphrase, blank generation, although he insists that he didn't mean a crowd with all the dynamism of a static furry TV screen, but rather a bunch of people finally freed by the collapse of all values to reinvent themselves, to make art statements of their whole lives. Unfortunately, such a great utopian dream, which certainly is not on its first go-round here, remains just that, because most people would rather follow. What you're left with, aside from the argument that it beats singles bars, is compassion. When the Ramones bring that sign on stage that says, Gabba Gabba Hey, what it really stands for is we accept you. Once you get past the armor of dog collars, black leather, and S&M affectations, you've got some of the gentlest, or at least most harmless people in the world. Sid Vicious legends aside, almost all their violence is self-directed. So if they're all just such a bunch of white little lambs, why do some of them have it in for little black lambs? Richard Pinkston, a black friend I've known since my Detroit days, tells me, when I go to CBGBs, I feel like I'm in East Berlin. It's like, I don't mind liberal guilt if it gets me in the restaurant, even if I know the guy still hates me in his mind. But it's like down there, they're striving to be offensive however they can, so it's more vocal and they're freer. It's semi-mob thinking. Richard Hell and the Voidoids are one of the few integrated bands on the scene. Integrated, what a stupid word, he says in parentheticals. I've heard that when he first formed the band, Richard got flack from certain quarters about Ivan Julian, a black rhythm guitarist from DC, who once played with the foundations of Build Me Up Buttercup fame. I think it says something about what sort of person Richard is that he told all those people to get fucked then and doesn't much want to talk about it now. Quote, I don't remember anything special. I just think that most people that say stuff like what you're talking about are so far beneath contempt that it has no effect. It's really powerful. Among musicians, there's more professional jealousy than any kind of racial thing. There's so much backbiting in any scene. It's like girls talking about shoes. All musicians are such scum anyway that it couldn't possibly make any difference because you expect them to say the worst shit in the world about you. And yeah, so he does say, though, that there's racism in the scene. He thinks that this one guitarist feels like it was worse in New York than in DC. He also says, I'll tell you one thing. The entrepreneurs, record company people and shit are a hell of a lot worse. People like Richard Goderer, who produced our album, and Seymour Stein, and a lot of the other people up at Sire Records, they were totally condescending. They'd talk to you differently, like you were a child or something. I heard a lot of cliches on the level of being invited over to somebody's house for fried chicken. I was reminded instantly of the day I was in the office of a white woman of some intelligence, education, and influence in the music business, and the subject of race came up. Oh, she said, I liked them so much better when they were just Negroes. When they became blacks, she wrinkled her nose irritably.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, right? Race hate, says Voidoid's lead guitarist Bob Quine. Sure, it gives me and Ivan something to do on stage, the defiant ones. But the ease and insight of the Voidoids are somewhat anomalous on the New York scene. This scene and the punk stance in general are riddled with self-hate, which is always reflexive, and anytime you conclude that life stinks and the human race mostly amounts to a pile of shit, you've got the perfect breeding ground for fascism. A lot of outsiders, in fact, think punk is fascist, but that's only because they can't see beyond certain buzzwords, symbols, and pieces of regalia that, I think, really aren't that significant. Ron Ashton of the Stooges used to wear swastikas, iron crosses, and jackboots on stage, but I don't remember any right-wing rants ever popping up in the music he did with Iggy or in his own later band, which many people were not exactly thrilled to hear was called The New Order. In the past 3 years,
that term just keeps popping up.
I know, right? In the past 3 years, Ron's sartorial legacy has given us an international subculture whose members might easily be mistaken at first glance for little brown shirts. They aren't for the most part. Only someone as dumb as the Ramones are always accused of being could be offended when they sing, "I'm a Nazi Shotzi," or tell us that the first rule is to obey the laws of Germany and then follow it with, "Eat kosher salami." I've hung out with the Ramones, and they treat everybody of any race or sex the same. Who they hate isn't Jews or blacks or gays or anybody, but certain spike conk assholes who just last week graduated from the Rocky Horror Picture Show lines to skag dabblings and now stumble around Max's busting their nuts trying to be decadent. Whereas you don't have to try at all to be a racist. It's a little coiled clot of venom there lurking in all of us, white and black, goy and Jew, ready to strike out when we feel embattled, belittled, brutalized, which is why it has to be monitored, made taboo, and restrained by society and the individual. But there's a difference between hate and a little of the old epater gob at authority. Swastikas and punk are basically another way for kids to get a rise out of their parents and maybe the press, both of whom deserve the irritation. To the extent that most of these spike domes ever had a clue on what the stuff actually meant, it only went so far as their intent to shock. It's like a stance, as Ivan says, a real immature way of being dangerous. Maybe, except that after a while, this casual, even ironic embrace of the totems of bigotry crosses over into the real poison. Around 1970, there was a carbuncle named Wayne McGuire who kept contributing installments of something he called an Aquarian Journal to Fusion magazine, wherein he suggested between burblings of regurgitated Nietzsche and bad Celine ellipses that the Velvet Underground represented some kind of mystical milestone in the destiny of the Aryan race, and even tried to link their music with the ideas of Mel Lyman, who is one of the prototypes for the current crop of mind-napping cult daddies. Interesting. On a less systematic level, we had little outcroppings like Iggy hollering, "Our next selection tonight for all you Hebrew ladies in the audience is entitled Rich Bitch." Cool. On the 1974 recorded live bootleg Metallic KO. And my old home turf Cream magazine, where around the same time, I was actually rather proud of myself for writing things like, in an article on David Bowie's, quote, soul phase, "Now, as we all know, white hippies and beatniks before them would never have existed had there not been a whole generational subculture with a gnawing yearning to be nothing less than the downest, baddest N-words." Everybody has been walking around for the last year or so, acting like faggots ruled the world, when in actuality, it's the N-words who control and direct everything, just as it always has been and properly should be. This is an interesting connection here. I figured all this was in the Lenny Bruce spirit of let's diffuse them epithets by slinging them out. Fuck Lenny Bruce. Anyways, awesome. I mean, maybe not, but it's annoying. I thought absolutely nothing of going to parties with people like David Ruffin and Bobby Womack, where I'd get drunk, maul the women, improvise blues songs along the lines of, I'm not going to show, he writes in like Ebonics, N-word, wishes his dick was bigger. Yeah. And of course they all laughed. It took years before I realized what an asshole I'd been, not to mention how lucky I was to get out of there with my white hide intact. Okay, about Lenny Bruce. I'm sure a lot of these guys were very happy to see this white kid drunk on his ass making a complete fool, if not a human TV set out of himself. But to this day, I wonder how many of them hated my guts right then. Because Lenny Bruce is wrong. Maybe in a better world than this, such parlor games would amount to cleansing jet offtakes, and between friends, where a certain bond of mutual trust has been firmly established, good-natured racial trade-offs can be part of the vocabulary of understood affections. But beyond that, trouble begins. When you fail to realize that no matter how harmless your intentions are, there is no reason to think that any shit that comes out of your mouth is going to be understood or happily received. It took me a long time to find that out, but those words are lethal, man, and you shouldn't go slinging them around for effect. This seems almost too simple and obvious to say, but maybe it's good to have something simple and obvious stated once in a while, especially in this citadel of journalistic overthink. If you're black or Jewish or Latin or gay, those little vernacular epithets are bullets that riddle your guts and then fester and burn there, like torture flak hailing on you wherever you go. Ivan Julian told me that whenever he hears the N-word, no matter who says it, black or white, he wants to kill. Once when I was drunk, I told Hell the only reason hippies ever existed in the first place was because of N-words. And when I mentioned it to Ivan while doing this article, I said, "You probably don't even remember." "Oh yeah, I remember." He cut me off. That was 2 years ago. One ostensibly harmless little slip. You take a lifetime of that, and you've got grounds for trying in any way possible, even if it's only by convincing one individual at a time, to remove those words from the face of the earth. just like Hitler and Idi Amin and all other enemies of the human race. So yeah, I thought that was
yeah, and I want to just juxtapose that for a second against the whole, like, a couple of years, or maybe last year, there was that girl who was like, I've academically studied punk, you know.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
now that part of it became a big meme, but she claims in the video, she was like, yeah, and punk, it came out of, radical, like, African Americans and stuff like that. And it's like, what she's talking about is that there were bands, like, there's a documentary about a band called Death.
Oh, Death is a great band, yeah,
that like were black, and there were black punks from the very beginning, but like the idea that it was mostly like a black thing is just, it's not, from what I've ever read or seen, it's just not true. And like,
that seems ahistorical. And
my own personal experience going to like local shows that were like punk and hardcore and all that stuff was that there was just a lot of casual racism until probably about,
well, yeah, I mean, I think that
5 years ago, and then there became, and I'm glad about it, but then there became a much more like aggressive kind of anti-racism that I personally have experienced, and it's like, that's my personal experience with it. And it's like, yeah, I mean, when I first started going to shows, nobody was just like super racist or anything. And in my area, there was a lot of like Hispanic people that went to shows and stuff, but like, or Latinx, I don't know, but that would go to shows, and like, no one was just like super overtly racist, but there was a lot of like casual racism, sexism, and a lot of like kind of casual homophobia. It wasn't
and I would imagine
cultural influence in American culture in general, but like historically speaking, like, whenever there's like that dialectic between like the sort of white appropriation of black art forms, or the black participation in white art forms that are kind of created to exclude them in some way, like maybe minstrelsy is an example. You have like black minstrel performers and obviously blackface minstrel performers. There's often like, a dialectical tension between like people trying to use this like in a liberatory way and racism, and I think that is true of like other cultures that are other musical subcultures that are influenced by have a black influence in them, like in rock or in all sorts of things like that. There's always been that kind of reactionary element, and also an anti-racist element maybe that is in tension with it, and they go back and forth, in terms of their dominance. But I mean, the thing about punk, I feel like, is that definitely like in the like mainstream kind of like white suburban manifestation of it, like the racist elements, or at least like the casual racist elements, really the sort of ignorance and not like realizing why, like it's not funny to be like ironically like let's kill every Arab or something, like it's like not worth whatever like provocation you think you're making, like that really does seem to be lost on people. And like ultimately, like the sus aspect of it is that like the politics at the core of it were ultimately like, no, not to knock on your high school self, but like kind of like nihilistic and just like sort of like fundamentally reactionary, and just based on kind of like osmosing whatever like oppositional take you could, like we watched that Donahue interview with the hardcore kids and from like the 80s, and it's shocking to see them like being like, we're rebelling against the suburbs, like this, we can't do anything. And even like all the experts were like agreeing basically with that analysis and saying like these kids don't have anything to do, in the suburbs. We've left them by the wayside, they don't have places to go and have fun, so they enter into this music scene. But like their actual political opinions that they were espousing were like literally Reaganite talking points, like about welfare queens, like down to the actual vocabulary. And it's the same thing of like kill a commie for mommy, like this senseless contrarianism of like hanging up an SS flag, et cetera,
I mean, I mean the minute that the minute that like Donahue calls them on their bullshit by reading I think this one song by the hardcore band leader Jimmy Gestapo, interviewed on it. Like they're kind of like, it's like their parents like middle class Reaganite politics like totally flare up the minute they're like asked to confront like, hey, like this song, this is reactionary shit, man. Like this is kind of racist. Like all these minorities like complaining that they have it worse. Why don't they go back to their own fucking country and stop?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Well, and you know, what's a more punk rock statement than the solution is not, you know, government is the problem, you know, whatever the Reagan quote.
Right? I mean, it's literally,
more, you know,
yeah.
The solution to our problems isn't more government. Government is the problem. Like, you know, there's literally a True Sounds of Liberty song called "Abolish Government."
Isn't it
now,
funny
course,
how that's
more of an anarchist, I guess, perspective.
It is.
But it's very easy to appropriate that language for.
Yeah,
well, as we've discussed, as anarchists in general have this issue.
Well, I remember going to see like the Leftover Crack, like when I was in high school in New York, like around St. Mark's Square, and you know, they like I remember one of the bands that was playing that day, like you know, said like "God bless America" or something like on stage, and someone was like from the audience was like "boo," and he's like, "Oh, boo, you're wearing a shirt from this band? Like that's a patriotic fucking band, dude." You know, like it's just like, are you fucking kidding me? And this is like in the heat of the Bush era.
Cool.
They're like handing out like anarchist literature at this event, and meanwhile like arguing about like, you know, how you gotta like love the Stars and Stripes and like pledge allegiance to the red, white, and blue. Like,
well, and that's kind of a precursor to that whole like that's kind of a precursor to that whole trend of being like, you know, fucking like George Washington said, smoke weed, acquire currency, and own guns.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. No,
what is
totally.
more base than that?
Well, you notice like in the Donahue interview as well, that when they kind of go around to the audience, there's that older black gentleman that is not having their business. And he's like, you know what I did? Like when I got out of high school, I went and joined the army. And then like, you know, I worked for 30 years and blah, blah, blah. And I don't see why they can't. And like Jimmy Gestapo's reaction is like, hey, sir, like I'll take you out to any military base. I know 200 Marines that are in the hardcore scene. Like we got so many service members like in our scene, and it's like everyone's in the military, and it's like that doesn't sound as cool as
kind of on that tip. Do y'all know anything about Mel Lyman, the cult leader
no.
Well, he mentioned him in the article, but
so Lyman is funny because he's like, I don't know a ton about him. I just kind of gave him a little look over before the show, but like he was friends, or I don't know if he was friends, but he was in the circle of like Andy Warhol, kind of the acid probably that he got to start, you know, his cult with. He was in the orbit of Timothy Leary whenever he was in New York, and like,
yikes.
You know, kind of the vibe I got from it was he seemed similar to like Manson or somebody, but in New York instead of in like California.
Oh, I see here. He founded the Fort Hill community.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a cult. He mysteriously died, I guess, in 1978.
Yeah. And he knew, from what I understand, he knew a couple of musicians as well, kind of in New York, and was himself kind of like a failed musician, like similar to Manson and stuff like that. Like it seemed like the paradigm was just very similar to Charles Manson. You know?
Yeah, he did fall in. I see it here that he fell in with Timothy Leary early. In 1963, he became acquainted with Timothy Leary's group of LSD enthusiasts, the International Foundation for Internal Freedom, if. And I guess he said, I'm just reading from his Wikipedia. Knowing LSD's power, he felt his girlfriend, Judy Silver, was not ready, but stated, "The bastards that if gave her acid. I told her not to take it. I knew her head couldn't take it." Lyman's fears turned out to be justified, and she left college and returned to her parents in Kansas. According to a Rolling Stone article, Judy got all fucked up. This is his second old lady. I mean, like, she got really twisted. I don't know if it was the acid or the scene or whatever, but she split.
Yeah. And you know, something that's kind of interesting that Dave McGowan brings up, and that also Tom O'Neill brings up in Chaos, is how towards the later 60s in California, kind of the drug culture shifted off of acid into speed and got really into like amphetamines. And
Oh,
it's funny 'cause
definitely.
that fueled the early punk scene. Like everybody would do amphetamines.
And
Lemmy
it's funny
from
because
Motorhead is not a punk necessarily, but a lot of punks
yeah.
like Motorhead. And he talked about doing that old school amphetamine, and he said you would snort it, and it was like, and in some interview he gave, he said that you would snort this amphetamine, and it was like snorting like powdered punk, basically.
Oh my
but it
God.
it would just get you wound up for like days after you like.
I wonder if the Hells Angels were, supplying them.
I'm sure.
Of course, we know there was another really monumental historical movement in the 20th century that was powered by speed. I think it was called Wehrmacht. I don't know what it is about meth and like Nazis, but like, I mean, it kind of makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah, but, and you got to think about like Nick Land and accelerationism and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, also
Nick Land literally, I mean, on all kinds of drugs, but from what I understand, his main thing was various forms of amphetamine.
Honestly, looking at
staying up for days on end.
Looking at the crowds at a lot of the punk shows and the decline of Western civilization, everyone was acting really weird. But I was almost thinking for a second, like, what drug is everybody on at these shows? Because everyone seems like really tense. I mean, some people are just like geeking out, like tweaking and like moshing around. Other people were just kind of standing like really intensely, like staring at the screen, but like not dancing. And it's like,
well,
maybe
there are
like
some
trucker
of these
speed.
like weird ass drugs. Like I was watching the Beatles documentary that recently came out, that Peter Jackson like restored all this footage of them. And at one point they take like some weird old amphetamine that like is like off the market now. Like it was legal at the time, but then they're like, it's too addictive, and they just took it off the and like I'd never heard of it before. It was like I forget what it was, but it was just this weird part where they're like, let's all take this drug, everyone.
Well, I think they started doing that in Hamburg, right? That's where they developed like their speed habit, because they would play late night shows like 5 days a week, and so the only way they could get through.
But it was just weird how like this drug like had just like completely, at least like it had escaped my like memory totally, like and like it's weird how, I mean, remember Crocodile? Like there's weird amphetamines that just like emerge and then like just like recede back into the mists of time.
And speaking of ISIS, I already mentioned it before, but Captagon, which has been found like all over Syria, and like hundreds of thousands of like Captagon pills, which is kind of like Adderall.
There was a supplement you want to talk about, kind of like imperial death machines fueled by speed. There was, and they had a supplement available in commissary during the Iraq War called Ripped Fuel. And it was supposedly like a pre-workout, but you could I encountered it by watching that show Generation Kill, and then of course I looked it up online to see if I could find any old school Rip Fuel. But it was a drug that was like a bunch of caffeine and then a bunch of like ephedrine, and the amount of ephedrine in it was basically what kind of like got people geeked out. And there's a scene in Generation Kill where a dude is just like eating tons of Ripped Fuel like as they're going into Baghdad, I think, or wherever they're going.
Jesus.
And like there's people on the comments of like the YouTube video of that clip, and then like in the comments of like, because they still have Ripped Fuel now, but it's like just the caffeine. They took the ephedrine and whatever else was in it out of it,
Yeah.
And all you can just see a lot of veterans being like, man, remember the days when we would just eat like handfuls of Ripped Fuel and go shoot these damn, these damn Arabs.
Jesus. And I think also, I know I've encountered reading in various places, like probably like huge swaths of the military are either prescribed Adderall or like modafinil. Like Provigil. I know like drone operators are obviously all on like amphetamines, as well as combat troops. I remember even reading a study once that they maybe, I don't know if this is like super proven, but that they hypothesized that that taking amphetamines and then encountering traumatic situations actually like deepens the PTSD. because
I would
it
imagine
imprints,
so.
you know what I
just from
mean?
my
Because like it
experience
imprints on
of,
your
like,
brain
taking
harder
those
because you're
things,
hyper
yeah.
aware. It's almost like your
Yeah.
brain can't dissociate a little bit from
Yeah.
it, like when it happens. So it's like maybe that compounds like the problems of like PTSD and like depression that, you know, soldiers have, or
Yeah.
drone operators from killing people like on Adderall all day.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Combined with the sleep deprivation.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
We're from Frisco.
We're Frisco all the way. We're kind
What do you think? There's so many of us. 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 Let's have a war so you can go die. Let's have a war. We can all use the money. Let's have a war. We need the space. Let's have a war and clean out this place. Oh, hey, I'll be just easy. There's so many of us. 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 Let's have a war. Check out the Dow Jones. Let's have a war. If it started New Jersey, let's have a war. Blame it on the middle class. Let's have a war. We're like rats in a cage. Oh, ready? The money is. I think that's as easy. There's so many of us. 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 Let's have a war. Sell the rights to the network. Let's have a war. Give guns to the queers. Let's have a war. It started in New Jersey. Let's have a war. The enemy is within. Ready? Started in Or the land of the free and the homos
We're back.
Would it be cool if there was a kind of like a little connection I wanted to make, and just going into this next hour, if I could, like, would it be cool if I just made it and then like?
Yeah, by all
Let's
means.
go.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so we were talking about the Copeland family stuff, and I was just wanted to read from where McGowan talks about the Copelands in Weird Scenes.
Totally.
And then kind of tie that back into the Pussy Riot stuff we were talking about, Dimitri.
Absolutely.
Okay. So McGowan, he talks about, all these different bands that started coming out during the punk and kind of new wave era in the late 70s and early 80s. And he says, all the acts listed above had something in common. In addition to being among the most critically acclaimed and commercially viable of the new artists, all of them owed their success, at least in part, to their association with one or more members of the Copeland clan. The patriarch of that clan, Miles Copeland Jr., was something of a legend in Western intelligence circles. At the outbreak of World War II, the former working musician was magically transformed into one of the founding members of the OSS. During the war years, while he was stationed in the UK, he met Elizabeth Lorraine Addy, a British intelligence asset then assigned to the Special Operations Executive. Lorraine's brother, Ian, was also a highly placed British intelligence operative. Miles and Lorraine, he the son of a doctor and she the son of a the daughter of a prominent neurosurgeon, were married in the UK on September 25th, 1942. After the war, the two moved to Washington, D.C., where Miles worked alongside other intelligence heavyweights like Wild Bill Donahue to form the Central Intelligence Agency. For the next several decades, Copeland would play key roles in various nefarious activities throughout the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. In 1947, he was dispatched to Damascus, Syria, to serve as the CIA station chief and to orchestrate a series of coups that resulted in power being consolidated in the military and national security sectors. And he talks about their sons being born, the first of their sons being born in Syria.
Yeah, Miles Copeland the third, right?
Yeah. And so I'm going to skip ahead here, and he says, in 1976, Miles, the son Miles, gave up his magazine, record company, and booking agency partnership and started over as an agent, manager, producer, and record company for numerous new punk and new wave acts that would soon emerge as some of the very brightest stars on the new musical horizon. Copeland launched several new record labels, including Illegal Records, Deptford Fun City Records, Step Forward Records, and New Bristol Records. An executive produced the first film dedicated to promoting the new scene, Erg, A Music War. And before I go on, I just want to say, so you had the Erg, A Music War in the late 70s. Then Decline of Western Civilization, I believe, came out in 79. Or maybe 1980.
It was filmed in 79. I think came out in 81. Yeah.
Okay. And then an interesting thing about this is that, so I was telling you, Dimitri, Penelope Spheris directed the first Decline of Western Civilization, and she also directed the Decline of Western Civilization Part 2. Now, I don't know about Part 1, but I have found out recently that parts of the second one were actually kind of staged. So there's two really famous parts of the second one. There's one where she's interviewing Ozzy Osbourne in his kitchen and he's cooking. And then there's another one where she's interviewing a musician. I can't remember his name, but he's drunk in his pool and his mom is watching him drink. And it's like a really tragic scene. And both of those things were like her idea. Like she told Ozzy that they should do an interview while he was cooking breakfast and he should like wear a robe and stuff. And then like the second one was like her suggestion of like, well, we should, what do you like to like hang out in your pool or what? He was like, yeah, and she was like the one who was like, oh, you can go ahead and drink during the interview if you want to. Like, I don't know if anything like that happened in the first one or not, but it begs the question. And then also Penelope Spheris directed Wayne's World, which was obviously based on a SNL sketch. Well, Fear famously appeared on Saturday Night Live in a performance that turned into like a little riot in the studio, and the New York Police Department had to get called to come like break up these like punks that were like destroying whatever the studio that SNL is filmed in.
Wow.
Which I thought that was kind of an interesting connection. And then of course also you have the Copelands in the UK at this time, and then you have Sex Pistols make their big TV debut, and it's the events that kind of put punk on the map, were these big TV appearances, and you have all these interesting things kind of to put them in context, that kind of get left out of the story.
Yeah.
And and I'm going to go on with McGowan here. He says, Copeland's office soon became the headquarters for the most influential fanzine of the era, Sniff and Glue. In 1979, Copeland and Jerry Moss, the head of AMC Records, launched International Record Syndicate, Inc., better known as IRS Records. The label quickly became home to many of the most influential new wave acts. In '83, Miles became the only music producer to be given his own show on the upstart MTV network, IRS Records Presents The Cutting Edge, which ran through 1987 and served to, not surprisingly, primarily promote Copeland's acts. Copeland was also given his own primetime television show in the UK, Miles Copeland's England, The program was widely viewed as being pro-conservative party and pro-capitalist, and was reportedly a favorite of then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. A repeat showing of the short-lived series was canceled amid complaints it would have undue influence on pending elections in the country. So, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about there's this sort of libertarian, almost like Reaganite strain to punk that a lot of people either ignore or maybe even try to play down as like not really being much of an influence. But if you look at who was producing some of these early acts and stuff, they certainly were
yeah, I mean,
direction.
Miles Copeland III produced the Cramps, which
Right.
from that quote earlier was
Yeah.
the girl was like posing in front of like a Nazi,
Like a
white
Nazi
nationalist.
church.
Yeah, exactly.
in Florida of all places.
And just loved like how white the Ramones were,
Yeah,
how
and
all-American
well, and
white
how they represented, American suburbanites who
Yeah.
apparently were being underrepresented at that time.
apparently deeply underrepresented
Yeah.
in like a existentially world historical degree.
Yeah, and so I like too McGowan. He points out that Stuart Copeland joined the police or started the police.
Yeah.
And to kind of cap off his passage here, he says in 2002, Stuart Copeland played briefly in a reconstituted version of The Doors alongside founding members Ray Manzarek and Bobby Krieger. Copeland's former bandmate, Andy Summers, who was a decade older than Stuart and Sting, had been on the Laurel Canyon scene back when the original Doors were playing the Sunset Strip. As he wrote in Rolling Stone in July 2007, in 1968, he was, quote, living in Laurel Canyon and going to the Sunset Strip every night. Briefly a member of Eric Burdon and the Animals at that time, Summers had been one of the regulars at the Log Cabin, which is the property that Frank Zappa lived at for a
That's
time,
right.
that the Manson family also occupied, and that a character McGowan mentions in the book, Vito Polakis, who is kind of cited as creating hippie fashion.
The freak
also,
culture. Yeah, exactly.
Also stayed at for a time.
Mm.
And I wanted to talk about all this stuff to kind of put the Pussy Riot thing in context, which is that so Pussy Riot became kind of popular there are Russian punk bands. I'm not sure if they're technically still together or not anymore.
There's some incarnation of them that is still together, but I don't know if like the two main girls, Nadia Tolokanova, I think, and then the other one, Masha, forgetting her name, but the article that you sent to me about how she was, sorry, go on.
Oh well, no, yeah, and what's interesting to me about Pussy Riot is that, so yeah, they're a Russian punk band, and I remember, back when I was in high school, they got kind of popular, famous, and for supposedly standing up to Putin.
Yeah, I remember.
And they got put in jail for, I guess, a couple of years because they organized this kind of artsy fartsy protest in an Orthodox church. And it was just funny whenever I was researching this, I found that article I sent you. It was from the LA Times, and it says, first, the other members of the band released a new single online, Putin Lights Up the Fires. I think this is from when they were arrested. And it says, the Guardian newspaper in England compiled clips and stills for an accompanying video, and the song could be a post-sentencing rallying cry for the millions of music fans and free speech advocates following the case. The song evokes the trashy minimalism of 70s UK punk's Crass with the urgency of young women who suspect that speaking their minds might result in a brutal prison sentence. In a later announcement, the U.S. State Department issued an official message of concern over Friday's verdict. Department spokeswoman Victoria Nuland said that, quote, the United States is concerned about both the verdict and the disproportionate sentences handed down by a Moscow court in the case against the members of the band Pussy Riot and the negative impact on freedom of expression in Russia. We urge Russian authorities to review this case and ensure that the right to freedom of expression is upheld. And it just reminded me so much of whenever the supposed uprising was happening in Cuba earlier this year, there was an interesting kind of part of that, which was that there were programs that the National Endowment for Democracy cultivated, which were to empower Cuban hip hop artists as leaders. And there was a tweet by Marco Rubio where Marco Rubio said, for those new to the issue of the hashtag Cuba protests, we are witnessing they were started by artists, not politicians. The song Patria y Vida powerfully explains how young Cubans feel, and its release was so impactful you will go to jail if you get caught playing it in Cuba. Now, and then on the National Endowment for Democracy site, I found this from an article by Alan McLeod from Mint Press News. I found out this information from there, but he cited a National Endowment for Democracy part of the website that talks about all this. It says, to empower Cuban artists is to promote citizen participation in social change. The group will carry out workshop, cultural exchanges, and artistic events. During its hip-hop summit in Colombia, it will promote South-to-South collaboration and invite artists from around the world to share their experiences of social transformation. So, in talking about all these things, they seem, I guess, kind of all over the place. But, I mean, if you think about it, it's like you have a precedent of a family that is very well connected to Western intelligence agencies, owning and controlling record labels and media outlets for this burgeoning, supposedly anti-establishment movement back in the 70s that has ideological threads running through it, which align with the Thatcher Reagan, kind of counter-revolution that was happening at the time. And that appeals to a lot of the same suburbanite white people that those, movements appealed to. And then you have a similar kind of moment where you have, Pussy Riot. Now, listen, I'm not trying to say that Putin or the Orthodox Church or socialists or whatever, but I'm just saying, I wouldn't put it past the United States to look at artists in Russia, as potential assets for, their kind of interests there.
Oh, of course.
And just one last point on the Pussy Riot thing is that they were part of a group before they were in Pussy Riot. I forget the name of the group, but its first big event was actually thought up by an Israeli citizen. I think he has dual citizenship in Israel and Russia. But
okay, so were you referring to Vaina, the anarchist art collective that they were in before Pussy Riot?
Yeah, that's
okay. So was that Oleg Vorotnikov? I think is the founder of that.
Well, yeah, well that's the founder, but there was a guy that helped them orchestrate one of their first big public displays. That was basically them having an orgy with
they
dead chicken.
It was it was called let me see, I have it right here. It is called Fuck for the Air Puppy Bear with an exclamation point. In 2008, the day before the election of Dimitri Medvedev, 5 couples, including I think the 2 main Tolokonikova was one of them, had public sex in Moscow's Timiryazev State Museum of Biology. And I guess they got disciplinary action against them, but they didn't get arrested. And
anyway, the guy that came up with that is an Israeli citizen, which I thought was kind of interesting. I can't find his name.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm having all these technical difficulties.
No, it's all good. I think that Pussy Riot kind of represents to me my kind of transformation of punk and how I looked at it, because I remember that kind of happened right after Occupy, and it was when the Arab Spring was still going on, and there was this weird era in kind of the like post-recession and the early Obama years where there
Yeah.
was almost like this like techno punk like optimistic energy that like
Yeah, well, and
yeah,
from what I understand, that's also the era where Weave was getting really gassed up as like a free speech warrior.
oh yeah, and he was on RT. He was being like lauded on RT and stuff.
Yeah.
Glenn Greenwald was hanging out with him at
Greenwald was hanging
parties.
out
Laura
with him.
Poitras, a lot of people that would go on to be rather prominent. And you know, for those
Molly
who don't know,
Crabapple was a big fan.
Molly
of Weave.
Crab. I mean, talk about the Occupy to Weave pipeline. Yeah,
and,
she was,
she just helped AOC with the Green New Deal video.
I bet she did. I bet. Same energy. I'm gonna say it. Same energy. And yeah, you know, Molly Crabapple went from being like an Occupy influencer to being a kind of like pro Pussy Riot, like kind of Twitter online, like Twitter activist.
And also you had Vice coming out. And I remember, you know, when I was in high school, Vice was like a huge deal with all my friends. Like,
oh my God, yeah.
We would like get high as hell and like watch Vice.
Well, also talk about like the punk rock like conservative crossover. It basically Vice embodies that. Like who embodies that better than like Gavin McInnes? But honestly, Shane Smith too.
Yeah, and Vice had a lot to do with kind of making that more palatable. Like there's really two forms of that started emerging kind of halfway through the 2010s. You have just the extremely aggressive version of it that like came out on 4chan and later 8chan. That Gavin kind of aligned himself with, and you have kind of the Vice as it kind of exists now, which was kind of taking that same energy but evolving it in more of like a neocon direction.
Yeah,
which not to say that Gavin and them are, you know, not necessarily neocons, but I'm just saying like.
Well, I mean, no, he was like a fan of George W. Bush. He was like hardcore neocon.
Yeah, that's another thing that gets lost on a lot of people is that like alt-right people are not necessarily at odds. Foreign policy or anything. It's more the fact that they represent how many neocons are.
Yeah.
But as far as the you know, and also that like Bush didn't have like you were just saying, Khalid, like you know, Bush had fanboys in the punk scene as well, you know, that were like doing as like a contrarian thing. Vincent Gallo was kind of similar.
Oh yeah, you know, he loved George W.
Bush.
Even Trey Parker and Matt Stone. I remember them giving interviews in the 2000s where they just
kind of
talked
sympathetic to
in
Bush.
a very punk rock way. Like I'm so sick of fucking Hollywood liberals. I just go to a party and be like, I love George W. Bush, and everyone's like, which is kind of like, I don't know, having just gone through the Trump era living in Los Angeles, like a little part of me gets it, but also like that's even worse to be like, yeah, George W. Bush rocks.
Well, and I mean, South Park too is a big part of that whole like wave of like, and also like Penn and Teller bullshit. You know, there was this whole wave, of like just kind of a more consciously like right-wing libertarianism running through punk. Kind of that I think still runs through it, because I started noticing personally probably about like in that same time I mentioned earlier, probably about 5 years ago, I knew a guy who was he was like called himself like a libertarian punk, you know, and would like vote for the Libertarian Party and stuff. And he ended up becoming like a raging Trump supporter because that's
not too surprising to me.
He saw it as like the punk thing to do.
That's the thing in the culture today. Trump is almost like
is a new punk rock, as
we've heard that many times.
There you go. You know,
Paul Joseph Watson was the coiner of that, right? That conservatism is the new punk rock because
well, in a way, I mean, honestly, rebellious. Like if you go back to like the way Jimmy Gestapo acts on the Donahue Show, 1986. And then you look at the way that Donald Trump would act in relation to the media, like, you know, decades later, you can see a certain synchronicity there in terms of
for sure.
Like Trump having a punk energy.
And trolling basically. Like
Steve Bannon is on the record saying that when he was working on World of Warcraft, it was seeing, you know, the rootless white males that would spend all day playing video games.
I'm sure Brock Pierce and Mark Collins Rector could show him all kinds of ways to get in touch with rootless white young males, especially.
That's why Steve Bannon loved Milo Yiannopoulos and like you know, brought him on to like cover Gamergate or whatever, because he thought he could like, you know, represent the Gamergate contingent. But yeah, I mean, like it's the same thing, you know, like like it's definitely true that like whether like it's supporting Trump or something even more outrageous. Like there's tons of things that are even more outrageous than that you could do. Like, ironically talk about how you hate Arabs or you're a Zionist or something like that, or like
also punk rock.
Or
circling
be a Nazi.
Well, okay,
that doesn't mean that's good by virtue of being contrarian. Like it's not just because that will aggravate like people who are shitty doesn't mean that like that's good. Like saying to someone like I want to like kill and like rape your family or something like. That would piss off Henry Kissinger if said to him. But that doesn't mean that it's good because it would make him upset. But that's
it's like Minor Threat wrote "Guilty of Being White," and that was like a punk anthem.
Oh right, yeah.
It was
that.
And he was in an interview, and they said, "Why did you write that?" And he said, "It's an anti-racist song."
Right, because
I wrote it as
concerned about like reverse racism. Yeah.
Like white. Didn't Black Flag have white minority?
Well,
that one's a little different though, right? I forget.
Yeah, and also you got to look at this too, though. Slayer later covered "Guilty of Being White," and towards the end of their version of it, they changed it to "Guilty of Being Right."
White is right.
I guess so, and you got to think Slayer with all the Nazi kind of overtones.
Well, as all the kids
it's very
said on
funny, like the persecution complex, like, but I mean, it's very teenage, like to a teenager. Like there definitely were many people, like especially like in environments where like perspectives from people who are not white or like aren't generally represented, like people like they want to believe in like equality and fairness. So like they like if someone has like an aversion towards like white people or white ideas, or points to whiteness as like a negative cultural force, like they're gonna be like, how is that fair? Like, if I said the same thing, like, why is there no White History Month or something? Why is there like that type of thing? Like, it's very, very teenage, and I guess, it seems from the lyrics of the Minor Threat song that the lyricist was 19 because he talks about having served 19 years for the crime of being white.
Well, and you want to hear something interesting about Minor Threat too. Ian MacKay's father was in the presidential motorcade when JFK got shot.
What? Really?
Yeah, like it even says on the Wikipedia here. It says.
What did his father do?
His father was a writer for the Washington Post, first as a White House reporter, then as a religion specialist. In his capacities as a journalist at the White House Press Corps, McKay's father was in the presidential motorcade when John F. Kennedy was killed in 1963.
Wow.
Which, again, not necessarily a deep political connection, but it's kind of interesting.
It's an interesting one to point out because
he was a what specialist?
He was a religion specialist.
A religion? And what religion?
It says that the senior McKay remains active with the socially progressive St. Stephen's Episcopal Church.
Episcopal, huh?
Yeah, Episcopalian in D.C.
We're always suspicious of Episcopalians around here.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, it's like it's not even a religion.
Oh, hey, and check this out. McKay's paternal grandmother. His grandfather was Milton McKay, also a magazine writer as well as an executive with the Office of War Information.
Interesting.
Well, I guess he was a specialist in like just writing about religion in general for the WAPO. Yeah. Okay. I say.
Yeah, Ian MacKay in general is an interesting kind of character to me because he's also responsible for kind of like alt rock in a lot of ways, and I never got really involved.
He was Fugazi, right?
Yeah, Fugazi had a pretty big influence on a lot of some grunge bands and later like alt rock in general and kind of some indie rock.
I mean, that's the other thing is that like the punk ethos and like the punk attitude like broke out of the generic boundaries of punk by like the late 80s, early 90s and ended up basically influencing all of like alternative rock in the 90s. So even if you weren't like a punk, like, I don't know, I went back
to like do it yourself, DIY, that can go two ways. That can be like, we're going to kind of create I was reading an article said that or an essay that was called "Did Punk Matter?" and it pointed out that there was an element to punk where there was kind of a kind of, if you want to put it in like Gramscian terms, kind of like a counter hegemony developed. But at the same time, a lot of kids just took do it yourself in this extremely individualist direction, that wasn't dissimilar from
course,
the hippie kind of self-actualization model of like
when I was
liberation.
growing up was like the heyday, and Long Island was a big hub for this as well, of like a emotional hardcore of emo
Right.
music, which I think, Ian MacKaye helped produce, like Rites of Spring and things like that. And Fugazi, I feel like, was a big influence on like early emo.
Yeah, definitely.
And in the heyday of emo. Yeah, which is of course not like, at least there was a pretense of like politics and punk. And there's some good, there's some punk bands that have good politics generally, and like bring kids to political awareness of topics that otherwise they wouldn't be. Like I remember the band Against All Authority, which is like a punk ska band. Very like cringe name. And I feel like they're just like anarchists or whatever. And like, but their lyrics like are about like the cops and like how like and police abuse of power, and about like the genocide of Native Americans and things like that, even though there can be a certain like vanity or just performativity to the awareness of those things in the punk community, like that's still like generally good politics. But of course, some of it, like in the case of emo, it just becomes like about like, your high school girlfriend or like whatever, like being sad
inward, navel
things.
gazing.
Yes.
Self-absorbed.
Like, just totally apolitical and just like about like, I hope you die on the ice.
Well, and it can even get specifically kind of fascist. Like one of my favorite bands actually is a band called Earth Crisis that are notorious for being just like the uber like straight edge band. And they were part of a whole wave of like straight edge in the 90s that kind of developed into forming like crews and beating up drug addicts and drug dealers and stuff like that. And it was a whole thing. There was I don't know if y'all have ever come across him, but there's a YouTuber named Finn McKenty who's like an old hardcore kid, and he used to have a blog where he'd write about a lot of that stuff, like living through that in the 90s. And he was part of a crew at one point and later started doing drugs. But Earth Crisis, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned the sometimes there's good political messages, because they have a song on it on one of their records called Unseen Holocaust that's about the genocide of Native Americans and indigenous people. But then on that same album, they have a song called Firestorm, and the lyrics to Firestorm, there's one lyric that is so like Reaganite, it's crazy. It's like it's demons. It's about basically beating drug addicts to death, and it's like, born addicted, beaten and neglected, families torn apart, destroyed and abandoned, children sell their bodies, from their high they fall to drown. Now here it is right here. Demons crazed by greed, cut bystanders down, a chemically tainted welfare generation, absolute complete moral degeneration.
Well, that reminds me
it's
of
just crazy.
That's like Iran-Contra was going on, but like, what are they most pissed off about?
Well, they were around during the Clinton years, actually.
Oh, okay, interesting.
But even then,
Clinton definitely dabbled in some of that stuff too, like workfare.
Well, I mean, he helped consolidate a lot of those Reaganite policies,
for sure.
And rhetoric. He used that same rhetoric about
the era of big government
being on welfare, and
absolutely, very much. He was
moral degeneration
in every way, and like beyond at heart, like practically speaking, and also like in ideology. But I was gonna ask, are you familiar with like the hardline movement? I had some awareness of that because
it was like,
what is the hardline movement?
It was
hardline is kind of like what Earth Crisis was sort of a part, like that newer wave of straight edge that was just like very aggressive and
right. Yes, they were.
There was another band called Vegan Reich.
Yes, right. Vegan Reich, which is an amazing name. And that had a guy, I don't remember what his original name was, but he eventually became Muslim after a fashion. Sean Mutaki, I believe is his name. And he, it became kind of like a vegan Muslim, like, sort of weird, like fusionist, like pseudo quasi-fascist type bands, like but prior to that they had all sorts of like incarnations, Vegan Reich being one of them.
And Judge was a little bit earlier, but they had an influence on a lot of those hardline bands because they were one of the first straight edge bands, as far as I know, that was like basically just like, let's just kill drug addicts and drug dealers. Like, let's not even try to, like, yeah, because you had, like, you know, Youth of Today and stuff, and they were a lot more positive. They were like, let's try to kind of talk people out of doing drugs or point out, you know, how bad it is for you. Then, like, you had bands like Judge come along that were like, no, this is a war. We need to, like, annihilate the opposition, like, through, like, street violence.
Yeah. Now, circling back around to, you know, some punk bands maybe didn't have like the worst political messages. There's one that stands out, I think, and I feel like if we want to make this something, you know, not make this a total punk bash. Bringing up, but okay. So the Dead Kennedys. I just noticed this morning. Somebody had posted on Twitter an article about the Beach Boys, but this article quotes a passage from the song "Kinky Sex Makes the World Go Round." And from "Give Me Convenience or Give Me Death." Now, Dead Kennedys are interesting. I think we can talk. You found some there's been some interesting information about Jello Biafra that has come up, and maybe like his family background. But you know, there is San Francisco punk band that generally are regarded as like legitimately like left wing, like left anarchist, and like very political. And I mean, I remember they
wrote about Dianne Feinstein kind of before that was.
And Jerry Brown. I mean, the California Uber Alice, like calling Jerry Brown like a liberal Nazi, basically. But I think so there's the little passage here. This is actually a very interesting song that is supposed to be like a conversation between the Secretary of Defense and the British Prime Minister about starting another war to promote economic growth. Right. But there's a passage here that this writer quoted. Now, don't worry about those demonstrators. Just pump up your drug supply. So many people have hooked themselves on heroin and amphetamine since we took over. It's just like Vietnam. We had everybody so busy with LSD, they never got too strong. Kept the war functioning just fine. It's easy. We've got our college kids so interested in beer, they don't even care if we start manufacturing germ bombs again. Put a nuclear stockpile in their backyard. They wouldn't even know what it looked like. So how about it? I mean, look, war is money. So, you know.
There's actually
kind of true. I mean, they seem to know what they were talking about.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, that's the thing is that, like, I don't mean to just shit on punk either, you know, because it's been a big part of my life, like, you know, and obviously had a big impact on me. It's always hard whenever you kind of like, you find out things about something that, you know, is such a big part of your life. You know?
Yeah. I mean, almost every episode, every music episode we've done on Subliminal Jihad has been the result of like that kind of painful experience of being like, what? Like, not that I was like super into every single person I later have called sus, but a lot of them. I mean, I think like the Doors, like a lot of the LA like 60s.
Yeah,
bands,
well, I used to love the Germs a lot. But then, like, when I actually started reading their, like, lyrics and kind of what Darby Crash was all about, I was like, damn, like, what is, like, there's a Germs biopic about Darby Crash, and the entire first, like, 10 minutes is just them talking about how badass Hitler was.
I mean, he's a Nazi skull. Actually, the documentary does have a scene in that where he cooks breakfast while like being interviewed, so maybe that was staged too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And he's got like people were drawing like swastikas on him with like black marker during one of his performances in The Decline of Western Civilization. He's one of those people whose name I hear about all the time is like, oh, like Darby Crash, like it's so tragic and cool.
There's a less kind of intensely like fascistic band. I mean, they're not fascistic at all, really, as far as I know. But Millions of Dead Cops was a big band for me.
I remember Millions of Dead Cops.
And it's funny because I was talking about this with somebody, and they pointed out they have a song where they like make fun of like China in a kind of like backhandedly racist way, which is just funny because they have all these songs about, you know, anti-racism and the cops being full of shit.
Yeah, that's the problem is that it like even when sometimes they make a good point, their puerility and their humor and the knee-jerk kind of like adolescent like need to shock kind of ends up undercutting that. So what you're left with is people like ironically saying like whack shit. like bad things.
Well, and you know, that kind of gets into what we were talking about with GG Allin as well.
Oh yeah.
Let's take this all the way down to the
right. Let's go right down to the gutter as far as it'll go. That was interesting. I didn't realize Todd Phillips like started his career. Yeah. So we watched I watched Hated. GG Allin and the Murder Junkies, which was Todd Phillips' like NYU student film. You know, so I guess this is like the punk to Joker pipeline. And
Joker is very punk.
I mean, he is kind of like the Joker. Like he just lives off this guy, and I feel like it's another name. I never really like listened to GG Allin or wasn't really aware of him before watching this the other day. But it's another name where people go like, oh, like GG Allin, he was so interesting and like so cool, and like it was a good documentary, like very accomplished for like a 19-year-old, but like he is repulsive. Like I'm sorry. Like GG Allin is like
one of my favorite parts of that documentary is when that really fucking sleazy guy with the big glasses that GG Allin is living with is doing the interview, and he's talking about all the crazy sex shit he's seen, and he says his friend's name who's like pissing in GG Allin's mouth.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh wait, dude, I probably shouldn't say her name.
But they left it in the movie.
And then they just leave it in the documentary. Like, damn, okay.
Yeah. No, I mean the actually the creepiest thing about that documentary were like the horn-rimmed hipster like fans of GG Allin that clearly were like hip like college kids like in New York, but like saw like, I like GG Allin, but like I'm intellectual. It's like these were the guys that like would become like Pitchfork or like magazine hipster, and it was a kind of detachment from it of like the guy relaying how GG Allin keeps promising that like he's gonna kill himself on Halloween at a show, and kind of saying with like a smirk that's like, you know, but people think he's going to do it one of these days. Like all excited about it. It's just like, what the fuck's wrong with you, dude? Like,
and then they filmed GG Allin's funeral, and there, you know, I haven't watched that footage in a long time, but if I remember correctly, there were like people like, I don't think anyone pissed on his corpse or anything, but there were people like flipping it off his corpse and like.
I think he had an open casket, but like
Allin's
no
fans
pants.
wouldn't go so low as to piss on his corpse.
You know.
It just, I mean, he was like shoving bananas up his butt, like during performances, like vomit, like licking his shit, like shitting on the ground and like eating it.
The
like,
Amazing Atheist did the same thing, the banana thing. I wonder if you got that from him.
You brought up in the DMs, Dimitri, too, the how interesting it is that his name was Jesus Christ Allin, and his crazy dad saw him as like a messiah figure.
Oh yeah, that was really bizarre. They didn't
Very
get
strange.
too deep into that. Even though they interviewed his brother, who has like an exaggerated Hitler mustache.
Yes.
Which is okay. But his dad was like I don't know what denomination, but he was like a crazy like evangelical Christian who might have been somewhat insane, and he named Jesus Christ Allin because he had a vision where like Jesus appeared and told him that GG would be like a messiah figure, and he raised them kind of in like rural Vermont in like a log cabin, and it sounds like that was a fucked up like home to grow up in that probably did a real number on him. And
and then we were talking about his friendship with Gacy as well. GG Allin was pretty good friends with Gacy and went and visited him in prison all the time.
And his friend said that like, well, you know, they asked what would they talk about, and they said, well, probably like sex. Like he said, you couldn't have a conversation, you couldn't go visit Gacy and like not talk about sex, and it probably like had sex acts involving children.
Right.
What the fuck?
I mean,
cool.
sure.
Like, what the fuck? Like, you know, like that's so weird about this. It's like the need to like flex and just be like shocking and bleh and just like whatever to like scare like the evangelicals on television that you see or something, or that are in your town, like leads to this point of like, he was hanging out with serial killer talking about fucking kids.
Well, and you know, GG Allin, it goes kind of back to when we were talking about Trump being sort of the ultimate punk in a way. You have the crossover of all these things with GG Allin in the 90s, where you have you have actual literal punk rock taken to its most extreme. Then you have him going on all the daytime talk shows, obviously the environment that kind of would later lead to reality TV, which is where Trump, you know, and then you have, you know, this whole the moral dimensions of like GG Allin being such a like morally reprehensible person, but then like the culture war flex of like dunking on evangelical Christians is so like ingrained in certain like hipsters' minds that they like have to reflexively support him because that's like
critical support for GG Allin. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
it's
just
truly amazing. Yeah, but like
you know,
that
you have
really,
yeah,
it's one of those things where like it's underappreciated as a cultural force, I think, because it's like so like ridiculous, but I really, and like it also deals with like I guess the millennial generation in a way, whose like sort of political identity is still in a way sort of incoherent. But the like the impact of like being online and like that sort of like anti-evangelical like radicalization is so like politically like determinative. And I mean, like, yeah, like fuck like evangelicals, like they're annoying, and like especially like the representation of them like on network television or like stuff like that is like, you know, an even more annoying version of like, you know, the very not only annoying but like pernicious and like you know politically like repugnant reality of a lot of what evangelicals espoused, and particularly like the Iraq War comes to mind. But
really the 80s to the 2000s, those 3 decades, they really wielded like
I mean, so much hardcore punk was being kind of like opposed to Reagan in aesthetics, but then like ideologically having certain overlap.
Yes,
the,
and
like,
I think
economic ideals of the Reagan administration.
And I think that is something that I think, you know, like the in a way, like the things that like are opposed most fiercely about like the evangelicals are things like superficial things, like the fact that they're like religious, you know, like something that like almost really like almost everyone in the world is like, or at least an overwhelming plurality of people are religious. But like because people had that negative experience with evangelicals, like growing up, like whether they are from a family that was religious or and you know, evangelicals like LDS, like all, you know, all sorts of adjacent things, whether they were in a family that was religious or they just saw religious people like around them or grew up in a community that had evangelicals in them, then like, you know, they have devoted themselves to the idea that like the worst like and the most like, you know, politically important thing to like oppose and like the worst thing for humanity is like simply this vague idea of like being religious, which is like one of the most amorphous concepts ever, and like in no way like universally manifests like, you know, the real like things that are awful about the evangelicals are the particular political ideas that they advocated and like stood for in their context. But like for some reason, like the specifics of the situation have been totally just voided, and what is left is like the idea that like it's like, you know, this very very broad ideological thing of like, you know, let's be like nihilistic, let's like be like you know, not pearl clutchy about these things, like, you know, the superficial aspects of evangelical religiosity. Even like evangelicals don't like drinking, you know, or something like, you know, or like excessive drinking, so therefore like excessive drinking is virtuous and you're prudish if you like, you know, are find that to be like self-destructive or a waste of time, or if you feel like there's any like political value to like not being like basically a borderline alcoholic, or that there's something virtuous to this. Or like, you know, evangelicals like clutch their pearls when they hear curse words, so therefore like there's something revolutionary about like cursing, you know, or even like, you know, exactly like so just like these sort of like meaningless performative like provocative statements, you know, are and it even gets to the point of like, you know, being like a Nazi or something. But like weirdly enough, like that is pretty much, that's the part that it becomes like consistent with it, where it's like, oh yeah, like, well, you want to hear something provocative, like I believe in like killing every single Arab. Like that's what they also believe in. Like so like what is going on, you know? But
well, you know, I'm glad you bring that up, because there's one last thing. I know we've been going for a minute, but there's one last thing I wanted to read really quick from, and it's not really a historical thing or really even like a philosophical thing. It's a Cocky Duty, who is someone I follow on Twitter and a fellow WordPress blogger, and someone I've respected for a long time. Wrote about kind of being in a little anarchist friend group. I'm not sure at what time, probably in the 2010s sometime, but
oh yeah, is this the anarch-queering article?
Anarcho-queering Total Destroy is kind of what he sarcastically titled the
yeah
piece.
Yeah,
he wrote about it, and it just struck me because it was so like similar to my own experience that it was like freaky, because it was just like so much how friends of mine have been, throughout my life. And it's a short passage at the beginning, and he says, buying property is a revolutionary activity if you invite your friends to be your tenants. Cooking together and enjoying each other's company and reaching consensus on whose turn it is to buy the toilet paper is revolution. The state is corroded every time a shoplifted stick of butter is used to cook some eggs your chickens made. If, when you reach for something on a high shelf, you're hit by the smell of your own armpits, you're definitely contributing to the struggle to upend capitalism's death grip on the planet and free us all from domination and tyranny. The state, any state, is a hydra whose many heads include provisions against drinking in public. This is what anarchism means to me after having spent a good amount of time with a bunch of them. My frustrations with what encounters I've had with anarchist thoughts and ideas of praxis were vented in a long Twitter thread recently. And then, the following is an attempt to phrase it all better.
Yeah, that definitely resonated with like anarchists.
He says, from what I've seen of communal living, it seems to boil down into a situation where you have a bunch of roommates and you actually know them. You pay rent, you have a landlord, and have to scurry off to whatever way of making money you have. I'm sure there are some people out there living more radical, free existences, but the anarchists I've known seem to live normal lives that have been relabeled and aestheticized into quote-unquote freedom, with a few patches and smelly socks. And the rest of this article is very good. I'm not going to read it, but it's about kind of his observation of how gender, similar to the Lester Bangs thing. Gender relations are pretty much the same. There's not really, but the racial consciousness that's there is really more performative than actually substantive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just was so much my experience. In being into punk and hardcore and whatever, if you want to just call it the alternative for a long, there was such a strain of anarchism running through it, but that had no real direction to it at all. It was just kind of like living your life is how you're going to.
Yeah. The construction of alternativity, I think, is that essay we had covered about KPFA once called it. Like carving out this space where you can feel like you're resisting, you're raging against the machine and other shit like that, but you're really it amounts to a kind of lifestyleism at the end of the day. And I think at the worst end of it, going all the way back to like you bringing up Pussy Riot, because maybe people could be like, well, what's the matter with Pussy Riot? Well, initially, I was kind of sympathetic to like them when I first heard about them in like the post-Occupy days, and I thought, oh cool. And Khalid and I went to Russia in those years. Like we traveled through it and like we met young people that had like scars on their backs from getting like beaten up during like the presidential protests, like not in a sus way, like we randomly met these people. And like we were working for like recruiting for Victoria Nuland or something. No, but it was generally agreed that like Putin seems like an asshole, like an authoritarian asshole, man, and like he was beating up on us just the way that like the LAPD came in and rolled up the whole Occupy camp. But then as like time went on, you started to notice people like Molly Crabapple like really standing for like a no-fly zone over Syria and saying that like we need to stand up with like the Maidan protesters in Ukraine, even though they're allied with like the right sector and shit like that, and so on and so forth. These things escalating, and then Pussy Riot's like enthusiastic willingness after they got out of prison to become like NED like propaganda mascots for like Western lib style bullshit, like basically in Russia. And like to this point now, they're like by the time Trump came around, they were just making these like really cringy like music videos with like big time, people.
Well, now
attached.
they're just openly supporting Alexei Navalny.
Oh, of course, yeah, right.
And it's just like
and the one Pussy Riot member is dating like the former member of like a super fascist like right wing group. Yeah, we didn't even get to that part yet.
There is a Daily Beast article about a member of Pussy Riot who is dating a member of, it says in the article, dating a member of a far right Orthodox Church aligned group in Russia that was at I don't think they met at the protest, but they went to like the same protests and were like on for ostensibly pro queer.
That's like really amazing.
Yeah,
like,
this is Maria.
Shows, like the hollowness of like some of the stuff where it's like you can. And
it's funny because throughout the article, she keeps insisting, she's like, he's not a homophobe. He just doesn't like it whenever gay people like are outwardly like,
doing political stuff.
Funny.
I mean,
which is actually something I read about punks and stuff. Sorry, it was in that Columbine article about their influences that said that like it seemed like a lot of the skinheads like they were more pissed off at gay people, like less for their sexual preferences and more for the fact they were like political libs,
Yeah.
Like that was the real problem with them.
That brings it full circle. Because what Lester Bang was talking about in that thing we started off with, it comes full circle in that Columbine article and the point it makes, which is that youth is not a class. So when you create a cultural consciousness that is rooted in youth opposing the old, you can very quickly go down a reactionary path because if youth comes along in a time that is supposedly, progressive or socially liberal or whatever, and they look around and say, well, I want to rebel against this, it goes into a reactionary direction. And, you can see Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold as, if they would have hung around until 2003, they probably would have been big 4chan guys.
I bet.
And me and a friend were talking about them, and he pointed out to me that, if they would have done what they did in Iraq rather than in a high school in the United States to Iraqis instead of, white or, largely white high school students, they would have been seen as heroes.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then they would have come back and like they could have been like stupid poll guys or like, something like that. Like they could have easily, and been like people who are like, oh, like why are you gatekeeping? Like why are you gatekeeping veterans? Out of leftist movements. Like
I was there, man. I was there, and I was killing Arabs, and my general wouldn't let us kill even more of them, and that's why we lost Iraq.
Yeah, exactly.
Do that whole thing.
Yeah, they totally. Yeah, I could definitely. I mean, I feel like there is a big. Like,
we had 100 Michael Flynn's running the military, we would have completely dominated the Arab world by now, and we wouldn't even be having this discussion.
Yeah. I mean, and I really think that like this whole like ethos is like very like it has like a very predominant like cultural influence that like is not 100% appreciated. Like, and I do think that like punk is like one big component of it, which is I mean, it's just something I've noticed more since like doing the podcast, where people will be like, wait a minute, like you're saying that like this, like don't you see that this is just art, or something like that. It's like, well, like this art is expressing ideas, and like the ideas that it's expressing, like you're maybe saying that, like, oh, it's ironically like, but it's ironically like fascist or something. Like, yeah, don't you understand that like some things are like just art, or like, but it's not like serving anything. It's like its irony isn't like it doesn't it's not productive to any end, and it just is like replicating these ideas to the point where like these are the like ends. But I think that for whatever reason there is like a deep attachment to the principle that things like that should exist, that like it is somehow like very valuable like to have like this kind of sort of pointlessly like contrarian provocative like art that doesn't really produce anything positive, but it's just like maybe, I don't know, maybe it's something like a fundamentally liberal, where it's like in a liberal society we need to be able to like do satire or like whatever.
Well, it's like a constructed space of freedom that like you let people romp around in, and they can do obscenity, they can do pornography, they can do wear swastikas, ironically, because this is America, and in America it's free, and you see that running through like the
like
punk
Johnny
mentality.
Gestapo saying you couldn't do this anywhere but America. Like
and the Ramones are all about American suburban, values.
Right.
And I know I mentioned it to you, Wub, that I was like looking into like I'm very interested in like Eastern Bloc like rock music in the 70s and 80s, and there really was an explosion, and there were some really honestly like good bands that I think you could put like toe to toe with any American or British group of that time. In places like Poland, like they had a huge punk underground. I found a kind of documentary, really hard to find things that are like subtitled in English or translated. So, but like if part of it was in English, but it was just interviewing all these like leading lights of like the underground new wave and punk scenes in Poland, which is like, of course, like going under martial law and stuff like that, in the early 80s, and how like the orientation of all of these punk people was like anti-communist, because like they were anti-authority, and they were like in perfect kind of ideological sync with like their counterparts in the West for the most part, particularly the more right-wing ones. But it's just interesting also. I think it's really like interesting that you pointed out that this rebellion of youth as a class against the older generation happened when like sort of the global left was relatively at its like historic zenith in the mid 20th century. And it's like, don't trust anybody over 30. That means every old left person who has experience. So it means like every communist, every old school communist, like every Marxist, like every union organizer,
and
like
also
basically
even like people who you could accuse of being in line with those people. So like, the Black Panther Party, right? Like not necessarily an old person group or whatever, but if you're a young white suburbanite who hates authority, and you have a black radical asking you maybe to if you want to join the group or whatever, not join the Black Panthers necessarily, but you have these black radicals out there talking about a dictatorship of the proletariat, and if you want to join up, you got to maybe submit a little bit to somebody who knows more than you about theory, and
cut your hair a little bit, stop smoking so much dope,
maybe try to regulate your drug usage a little bit so you don't get arrested or you don't kill yourself before you get even close to
authoritarian.
Right, exactly. It's like, I mean, absolutely. And it also turns into one of the biggest things in political consciousness that seems to have developed in America in the 20th century was this concept of authoritarianism versus anti-authoritarianism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And rather than anything to do with class. And if you were anti-authoritarian, you were automatically on the right side of history.
Yeah, which it just happens to be that like that means that you can never like be in sympathy with like the entire communist bloc in the world, or any like third world country that uses any kind of authority to like control its own.
I mean, it's basically
resources.
like the fundamental idea of liberalism is the idea of like anti-authoritarianism.
Well,
like,
I mean, that's open society, closed society, like Karl Popper shit, which by the way, I did look from a previous episode that was the inspiration for George Soros having the open society, very explicitly. He was a big
Karl Popper fan.
A huge Karl Popper stan.
But anyway, so it is basically exactly open society, closed society, or just like, I mean, I guess anti-authoritarianism, like the vision of anarchy is very vague, and it's kind of just like, everyone has a different idea. Like, we're going to have a vegan Reich first and, kill all the drug addicts, and then we're going to have anarchy, like
but
it could be literally anything.
That is actually sort of a conservative form of dialectics. It's like, well, first, before we have the utopia, we're gonna take state power and remove the enemy, but then we can have anarchy.
True, but like, I mean, that just like is just one like iteration of like anarchy, which is ultimately extremely vague. I mean, there's a lot of vagaries when it comes to communism and to things like materialism as well. But I think definitely like anarchy, like practically speaking, is extremely nebulous what it actually stands for.
Sure,
and for all intents and purposes,
saying, like,
it just
it's always
becomes
funny
like,
to me
you know,
when
to
you get
quote
these people who are like libertarians, but then they accidentally like reproduce Leninism.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like,
it's
well,
like, are you a
Chomsky,
libertarian or do you believe in using the state to like crush your enemy? Which one?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Noam Chomsky, the greatest anarchist, you know, like the libertarian socialists. Like ultimately, like these politics either just degenerate into like pure liberalism or into just nothing, where you do nothing because like it like you know, since whatever political action or whatever political choice you would make wouldn't instantly create like the perfect society of like anarchy and total like mutual prosperity and voluntary relation, then it's worthless.
Then,
you know, like
nihilism all the way down.
Yeah, like,
and you know, it's like like in the article, the anarcho queering article, he talks about how, you know, like they have these types of people will claim more intellectual development than quote statist Cuba or black nationalists or any communist movement. It's like that kind of flex of like Cuba, they're authoritarian actually. It's like, shut the fuck up. Like what, like it really is a meaningless term, and it's at the core of everything that punk rock is like about, and really even like countercultural, a lot of the angrier like psychedelic rock and like countercultural music in the 60s.
Well, and I remember my former friend I was telling you about, who was like a libertarian punk, had a debate with me one night about trans people and was like, well, listen, man, I'm not saying that we need to like hurt them or anything. I just think I think they're mentally ill and they need to be like given help. And I was like, so what does that mean? Like you force them into like psychiatric institutions? And he's like, well, I don't know, maybe like, and I was like, well, then how are you a libertarian? Like, where's the libertarianism there? Like, you're literally talking about rounding people up, cops, and putting them in like in a concentration camp because they're gender non-conforming. Like, where's the liberation?
Very weird.
I guess as long as you
take
do it like with your own resources or something, then it's libertarian. I guess as long as the state doesn't do it and like you do it yourself.
Yeah, as long as like other people's
or
naps
you're the
aren't
state
violated
in some way. Yeah,
as long as the militia does it. Okay.
I mean, yeah, I guess like if you're a libertarian, like of the state, like if you, the libertarian, are like the one in power, then you can just do anything libertarianly because like your individual rights are like now the state. So you could just,
I mean, this is basically like patroonship or like warlordism.
I mean, it's totally incoherent, but like really, like I think by and large, what the effect is just to like have you do nothing, like sit around feeling superior, like listening to whatever, listening to punk music or to a podcast, and then you know like don't like you don't do anything because like if you were to do something, then you would be subject to some kind of criticism, like that would mean that you weren't somehow like in this like pure state because like like I'm totally complicit in capitalism in every way. I go about my day-to-day life and like interact with capitalism and perpetuate it like constantly, but I'm not like trying to build anything politically. So therefore, like if I were trying, then that would be, I would be indicted because then I would somehow be authoritarian or something like, but since I'm not out there saying that what I'm doing is good, then I don't know. Like it's
Well, you could even imagine a kind of anarchist deconstruction of Fred Hampton saying "Dare to struggle, dare to win," where they could be like, well, struggling means that there's competition, which we're against, and then also winning means there's a loser, and winners and losers, that's actually capital ideology. So really, it's Fred Hampton who's the bourgeois, bourgeois, like ideologist here. I'm the true
copy. Right.
Very.
I know that's kind of I don't know, maybe taking it too far, but I've heard arguments from people in real life to my face that are very similar.
I mean, I think it's kind of a right-wing canard that they usually bring up like sarcastically when they're complaining about wokeness, but like people saying that like math is racist.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've heard things that are like kind of close to that. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And I mean, even though we
that's
know
a
like the
different
Copenhagen
thing.
interpretation is a psyop, is an autop, and other things like that. But it's weird how there's a kind of like it almost is a kind of punkish thing in maybe some of the linguistic kind of reforms that I think we've all seen over the last few years with like what is it called, like standpoint.
Well, really,
Well,
like
I would
feel
say
like
that
in
queer,
academia,
gender queer. When I was growing up, gender queer, which is now something that's a bit more mainstream, that was actually like a sort of punk thing. Like that was sort of like a punk subculture in a way. Not that there weren't gender nonconforming people or that there weren't non-binary people, but like the terminology of gender queer and like queerness, that was kind of associated almost with punk culture.
Yeah,
or like,
punks or goths.
And I think that and because a lot of academics are like, if you're talking about academia, a lot of academics are sort of former outsiders, like with, white middle-class backgrounds. And so they definitely, there's a sympathy, like there's a lot. I mean, Michael Muhammad Knight, again, no offense to him, like he's done some interesting work like on Islam in many ways. But he's an example of someone who, was super into punk and into these topics, and now is just like an Islamic studies professor, or at least I think an Islamic studies professor. There's many people like that. I think that there is like definitely like a strong representation of like punk or people who have punk backgrounds. I mean, Genesis Peorage, she is like someone who I think has some sort of academic cachet, or Donna Haraway and things like that. Like that type of thing is taken seriously. So yeah, I mean, I think
didn't
that
even get into kind of the industrial movement.
Yeah, well, I think that
autism and stuff.
Definitely,
and I think that is true in a way. Like when it gets to like, and what I don't like about that, I mean, like you said, the Copenhagen interpretation is a psyop and an autop, and there's like many, and there are aspects to like the way that mathematics is like framed and the language around mathematics that like definitely are Eurocentric. However, like there also is like kind of like a reverse chauvinism of it, where it's like, oh, like books are racist, when like, of course, like there's plenty of cultures like that are not like European that have used books or have used numbers, and like to say that there aren't is like,
it's like the knee-jerk lack of rigor and like hearing what you're saying.
Look at the
because again, that requires like, and this is something that I think is sort of related to the reason why, for instance, like indigenous like knowledges are so highly valued in academia as like a thing to sort of return to for like new political ideas, because not to say that we're completely cut off from like all of the indigenous epistemologies, but it's like, of course there was a horrible genocide that happened that did wipe out a lot of knowledge institutions. I don't think that in our efforts to not suggest that the Native Americans don't exist anymore, or their knowledges or their traditions don't exist anymore, that like a lot wasn't lost. I don't think we should suggest that, because certainly much was. But what does exist also is inaccessible. It's often closed. So I think that because you don't really have to engage with it, you can just say like, oh, it would be great to sort of like vaguely gesture towards this. For instance, like that is much more popular than say like, let's look at the history of Islam or of Christianity, because the history of those religions, like we or those broader sort of the cultures that are associated with those religions, they're quite ugly. Like there's many ugly things in them, like there's many unpleasant things in them. Like you can't create a utopian fantasy out of that. Like you have to deal with like sort of the reality, which I think is the same thing of being like, there never was like an anarchist, Soviet Union of anarchist republics. There never was anything like that where you can say like, oh, that didn't work. You can go like say the Spanish Civil War, like or in May 1968, we were anarchists for 2 days, and like it was great, but then like the capitalists or something like that. So
it is an interesting parallel to like talking about the history of Marxism, like I remember I took a socialist theory class my last year in college, and I don't think it covered it. Like stopped at like 1917, which is just like it was an interesting class, but like why?
Because like when things are actually attempted, like when things actually materialize in reality outside of like some like theoretical pose, then like there's often like bad things that occur that like are the result of like, or that can be associated with the thing that was attempted. If they're never attempted, they can remain in this like, you know, or if there's not knowledge of them, or if they're kind of just in this sort of space of vague, you know, like Pollyannism, then like you don't have to deal with like the uncomfortable realities that emerge, you know, like and like, because if your stance is that if anything ever goes wrong, or there's anything bad associated with something, then like it's over forever. You know, like because Marx said this thing about Jews, you know, there's nothing of value in studying Marx because this person did this. Like,
exactly,
you know,
exactly,
like,
and it gets tarred with like what gets constantly reinforced, especially in our American culture, is that like it went wrong when they started doing authoritarianism, and it's kind of like what were they supposed to do?
Once they got
like,
any state power, like once it exists, yeah, exactly. It reminds me of someone saying like, you know, I really like Malcolm X, but he made many mistakes, including convert to Islam. And it's like, so what? Like you were a fan of Malcolm Little? Like you were a fan of him like before he got into politics, like at all? Like what?
Well, and you know that ties into something I've said on Twitter before that probably some people disagree with, but I just feel like it's true. Is, you know, I feel like someone made the point the other day that it's like, well, you can't really bring up either Marx or Bakunin being anti-Semitic because, you know, there was just a lot of anti-Semitism back then. And it's like in Marx's case, I know how this is it's gonna sound like I'm just doing team sports, but in Marx's case, I think that's true because his system of thought doesn't rely on anti-Semitism. Bakunin literally believed that like Marx, his version of socialism was like an extension of like Rothschild, like banking, like trying
I didn't know that Bakunin went that hard in the paint on.
He was much more of an anti-Semite than Marx. I mean, on the Jewish question,
about this and say that the translation is like opportunist or something, but like, I mean, he says there are two passages online that I know, statements that Bakunin made, where he said Jews like have historically been the people who like try to centralize like state authority, and you know, Marx, his whole like concept of trying to like use, you know, capitalism's tendency to centralize as a way to build up worker power. It's actually a con to like get workers to support.
Yeah, it's also it is somewhat relevant that Marx is technically Jewish also.
Well, yeah, sure. Oh, but I will say, I mean, there are many anti-Semitic Jews, and Marx's on the Jewish question is, I would say, not nearly as anti-Semitic as the things that Bakunin believed and wrote, but I'd still consider it to be pretty anti-Semitic. Like, I know people will argue and be like, he was saying that, you know, Jews just need to give up all their entire culture and their religion and they'll be fine. There's something ontologically bad about them. But I feel like that's still kind of, like, you know, saying like once, you know, that's still kind of a little bit fucked up. People are going to get mad at me for saying that. But my whole point is that doesn't, like, that was part of his intellectual milieu. He was addressing a deeply anti-Semitic culture, you know, that he existed within. Like he couldn't exempt himself from it any more than he could exempt himself from any number of things. That doesn't mean that like his work and his ideas have no value. They evidently do because of their incredible influence. Like, you know, there's value in considering the writings of even people who were like Wagner, who were like extreme anti-Semites, like, you know, especially due to their cultural influence. And, you know, but like, if you say like, oh, well, you know, so I think that's part of that impulse. I
want to draw one last comparison too between what Bakunin, what we were just talking about, what Bakunin was saying, and someone I know in real life who is like kind of from the scene, who their weird kind of journey led them to become a anarcho-capitalist and also a flat Earth believer. And we were discussing things one night, and basically his kind of view of history is that the Enlightenment was a conspiracy to make people believe in a round earth, to discourage people from believing in like the Christian God, basically. And that science from then has proceeded in that direction, and that, you know, that's the kind of authoritarianism.
There's a kernel of truth in that.
Well, authoritarianism crops up in this regard because, you know, if you were just going to let people investigate things on their own or whatever, they would come to the conclusion that no, the Earth is flat. and you know, all of this, you know, physics and stuff is incorrect. And it was interesting to me because it was, in some ways, these arguments that he's made and that I've seen from other flat earthers were similar to kind of criticisms of science from like Foucault and like people like
Yeah, exactly.
like it's a very postmodern kind of view.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, yeah, some of it is valid. It's just like interesting to me because it's similar, I think throughout all these libertarian kind of versions of libertarianism, there's this idea of the state emerges as a corrupting force. And if you simply resist the state as a concept, you're resisting a degeneration of humanity, and you're like rising humanity.
Yeah, like that's like
that's what Alex Jones says all the time. Like humanity is rising.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's kind of like the anti-civ anarchist thing where like we need to get away, like go away from civilization itself. Like it's more than, because like the modern state really is something that is like, you know, sort of originates with the Enlightenment, or, you know, the modern nation state is like a relatively new thing. But societies before that were authoritarian in many ways, and like they weren't necessarily like something that we should, you know, return with a V to, like in an uncritical way, like, you know, or just assume like we're like, you know, there is some kind of like almost like a allegorical fall from grace that happens like with, you know. But I think that it is valuable to consider like past modes of civilization, past epistemic regimes, because there is value in them. That doesn't mean that it is possible, it is desirable or possible at all to like truly just completely revert to them. But, you know, and the most insane version of that, even more so than like the integralist idea of like, you know, a global Catholic monarchy in like the medieval fashion, is like thinking we're all going to be hunter-gatherers or something. And then we're all going to be happy. Like, I mean, Steven Pinker is like a fool and a rube for saying like everything has gotten better, or like what, you know, like we're just, everything's better now than it's ever been. And,
well, when
know,
you're
like,
looking out of the window of Epstein's plane, it probably does look pretty good if you're a sicko.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, look at Epstein himself. You know, the his idea of you know, his kind of concept, like how he interpreted transhumanism, you know, is really how a lot of those guys think about libertarianism as well. It's like, you know, if you have the system allows us who are the worthy to divorce ourselves from the lower classes, you know, except insofar as we want to use them for our own pleasure. And then we can build machines that will, you know, take us to the next level, because, you know,
or achieve infinite life. I was reading the other day, I forget who,
or whatever,
but
or make the human race, you know, all little Epstein.
Like see, everyone that's left is going to be like our genetic children or something, like clones or whatever. I know Peter Thiel and a bunch of other people, like in his circles in Silicon Valley, have made agreements to freeze their bodies when they die so that they can be thawed out when medical technology advances.
And isn't it funny that we keep turning up all these links in our own kind of modern countercultures in the last 10 years or so to Thiel and Omidyar
the whole PayPal mafia. Even Courtney Love the other day was like calling out Elon Musk for making that rude comment to Bernie, like, "Are you still alive?" And she was like, you know, newsflash, Elon, like, I was blind CC'd on your PayPal Mafia email thread for months, and I saw all the messages you said, so like, you should be nice to Bernie. And it was like, it's like this weird thread, but it's like, wait, why is Courtney Love BCC'd on a PayPal Mafia like group email thread? Like, what the fuck? Like it's interesting that they're all like, you know, corresponding with each other. But like, why is Courtney Love in on the mix with it? You know?
Yeah, and like I definitely feel like that punk ethos. You know, as you said at the very beginning, Dimitri, like it's a kind of like a dirtbag type of thing. You know, like the sort of like contrarianism that is like very attractive, like up to a certain point, but then becomes very hollow.
Yeah.
In a way,
it either retreats into liberalism or
becomes substantive, but in a very reactionary.
True. The only way it can really like manifest and like actualize itself is by like random chaotic fasci violence, basically.
Yeah.
Like once you try to like initiate it onto the world, or you end up being like an NED influence op campaign, like sponsored by the CIA. Yeah.
Yeah.
Neither of which I think are very punk at all.
or are they exactly?
Or are they extremely punk?
Yeah,
I don't know. But
it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing.
I mean, as Avril Lavigne said, I think just like doing what you want is much more punk than wondering if something really is punk or whatever.
There we go.
You know? She's a rock chick. She loves to rock out.
All right. Hey, this is actually very unpunk, but I'm gonna have to go because I got to start getting ready for work. But
all right.
Before I leave, I want to actually plug one punk band that I don't think gets enough attention.
Okay.
From the 80s, and a friend of mine showed them to me a while back. They're called the Fearless Iranians from Hell. And they have a lot of great music, but they were a concept band. I don't know. I think one of the guys in the band was Arab, but the other three might have been white guys because I believe they were from Dallas. But they have a great song called "Blow Up the Embassy." And it's basically the entire thing is that while Iran-Contra was going, this band was like, what if we wrote punk music from the perspective of like the Iranian, like the Iranian government, you know?
That's
so it's all about, you know, they have a song called "Die for Allah."
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I see it here. Yeah, Fearless Iranians from Hell.
But they have a great. I don't know how they were a thing without people trying to kill them.
I don't know. That reminds me of, that reminds me a lot of a similar group. They're a little more like post-punk, but they were from LA in the 80s called Savage Republic. I think I've showed Khalid them before. A lot of their music was like instrumental, but they had this kind of theme of being almost like a Gaddafi like Green Revolution kind of aesthetic to like all their music. It's pretty, I would definitely check. They had a few albums in the 80s before they broke up, but I checked them out as well.
I almost started the last thing I'm going to say before I got to go. I almost started a project with a friend of mine. You know, have you ever heard of like a martial industrial? It's a subgenre of industrial.
Like warlike industrial, yeah.
Regular industrial is not warlike enough?
Well, it's overt. This one is like overtly fascist. Like it quotes. I wanted to make a band like that, but it would be kind of like a Tanky equivalent. And it was going to be named after a chapter in a Michael Parenti book called Stalin's Fingers. Nice. And it would have, you know, samples of Stalin's speeches and Mao speeches. I'm kind of glad I didn't do it because it probably would have ended up being kind of cringy. But
yeah, you might have gotten like negative attention for it.
Yeah, I might have been, you know, criticized.
I'm sure you would have been criticized, but
yeah.
Anyway.
Everybody's a critic.
Anyway, well, I gotta get going. But I really I enjoyed being on Subliminal Jihad.
Yeah, glad to have you.
Thank you so
Wub. Yeah. Where could people find you on Twitter? What's your Twitter handle?
You can find me at _Wub_ and then my WordPress is thewublies.wordpress.com.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely check that out. A lot of good content there. Thanks for coming into the grotto, Wub.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we'll see you out there on the InfoWar battlefield. And until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.
I'm gonna kill myself! I'm gonna lie dead on the floor! It's none of your fucking business! What I live and die for! I'm gonna hijack a flame! I won't do it for glory or fame! And when they catch me, they'll see I'm insane! Put your Ronald Reagan to shame! I'll do it over again and again! I do it over again and again! I do it over again and again! The embassy, blow up. The embassy, blow up. The embassy. I'm gonna kill a Marine. I wanna ruin his family. 40 gun in his hand. One shot, then he died. Pull the trigger again and again. I pull the trigger again and again. Pull the trigger again and again. Pull the trigger one more time. Blow up the embassy. Blow up the embassy. Blow up the embassy. Blow up the embassy. I'm gonna kill myself. I wanna lie dead on the floor. It's none of your fucking business what I live and die for.